You wake before sunrise. The air is still and cool, the kind of cool that only lingers for a brief hour before the Moroccan sun begins to warm the earth. You lie still for a moment, feeling the weight of the wool blanket over your legs, its fibers slightly rough against your skin. Somewhere beyond your room, a faint hum begins, a low vibration of distant voices. The clink of pottery, the soft braying of a donkey still half asleep. The ceiling above you is a familiar web of reed mats, their faint scent of dust and old smoke mixing with the night air that drifts in through the open wooden shutters. Through them, the early light is not yet gold, only a pale blue haze that softens the shapes of the courtyard outside. You can hear the gentle rustle of date palm fronds, bending slightly in a breeze that will not last the day. You stretch slowly, hearing your joints answer with muted cracks, and sit upright on the low mattress. The patterned clay floor beneath you is cool, holding the memory of the night's air. The sound of fabric shifting comes from the next room, perhaps a neighbor, perhaps one of your household. It hardly matters, for mornings here are shared by all. In the center of the courtyard, a clay basin catches the faint glimmer of dawn. Beside it, the scent of yesterday's mint leaves still lingers, left over from tea brewed in the late hours. You will fetch water this morning, as you do most mornings from the village well. The path is well-worn, familiar, but every day carries its own quiet rhythm. Some say that in the 17th century, the wells of Morocco were lined with stone hauled from riverbeds many days' walk away. Others insist the stone came from dismantled fortress walls, smoothed by centuries of touch. Historians still argue whether the deep wells in this region date back to the Almoravid period or were dug later, during the Saadian dynasty's expansion. You stand, drawing the shawl from the wooden peg near the door. The fabric smells faintly of dust and sun. Outside, the village is only beginning to stir, the light still soft enough to blur the edges of the mud brick walls. You pull the shawl close and take a long, slow breath, tasting the faint mineral tang of the air. It will be a quiet walk and the water will be cool. The rooster's voice cuts through the soft hum of morning. It is not a perfect crow. It begins too early, stretches too long, and wavers as if the bird itself is still shaking off sleep. A moment later, another rooster answers from somewhere deeper in the village, the two calls overlapping in a lazy, unhurried rhythm. You pause on the threshold of your doorway, letting the sound mark the true start of your day. The air outside is still cool, though it carries hints of what is coming, a faint dryness already sharpening the edges of each breath. The light is softer than silk, laying across the rooftops in pale washes of blue and gray. The narrow lanes are empty, save for the first few figures moving quietly about their chores. Somewhere, a clay door scrapes shut. Somewhere else, a wooden bucket knocks gently against a stone lip. You step into the courtyard, feeling the cool clay tiles press against your bare feet. Their surface holds tiny imperfections, a faint groove where someone once dragged a heavy pot, a roughened patch where the glaze is worn away. As you cross to the far side, a thin tendril of smoke escapes from a neighbor's chimney, twisting upward before dissolving into the dawn. The scent is wood, perhaps olive, mixed with the faint sweetness of dried fig twigs used for kindling. From beyond the courtyard wall, you catch the low voices of two women speaking in steady rhythm. A greeting, a question, an answer. Their words fade into soft laughter, carried down the alley by the shifting air. You know their routine. They too will be at the well shortly, each with a jar balanced on her hip, each moving in step with the other. It is said that in the 17th century, roosters in Moroccan villages were prized not only for their role in waking households, but also for their plumage, used in small decorative tassels for children's clothing. A curious note in one merchant's ledger suggests that some feathers were even dyed with crushed pomegranate skins to deepen their color before being sold in the souk. Historians still argue whether these vibrant feathers were purely decorative or had some unrecorded symbolic meaning in village rituals. The second rooster call fades, replaced now by the soft trickle of water in the courtyard basin, as someone, perhaps your sister, empties the last of yesterday's stored water for washing. You glance at the half-empty jar and know it is time. The well awaits, and the walk there is its own quiet ceremony. You pull the shawl tighter around your shoulders, step into the narrow lane, and begin to follow the sound of early voices toward the heart of the village. You reach for your morning shawl. It hangs on its wooden peg just inside the doorway, waiting in the same spot it has every morning for years. The fabric is light wool, loosely woven, soft in the middle where it has rubbed against your neck 1,000 times, rougher at the edges where the threads have caught on baskets and door frames. You lift it slowly, letting its weight settle across your hands before draping it over your shoulders. The wool smells faintly of sun-baked clay, dust, and the faint trace of last week's soap. You adjust it around your neck, folding one corner under so it rests snugly. The air is cool enough to raise a small shiver along your arms, and the shawl traps just enough warmth without making you drowsy. Its color, once deep indigo, has softened over time into something between gray and blue, the result of many washings in well water and the bleaching touch of the sun. The room around you is quiet, still shadowed, except for a thin band of light spilling through the shutter's gap. In the corner, a tall clay jar rests on a woven reed mat, its sides marked with faint water lines. It is nearly empty now, just enough for a final rinse of the hands. Your eyes rest on it for a moment, before turning back to the open doorway. Stepping outside, you feel the edge of the shawl lift slightly in the breeze. In the courtyard, the shadows stretch long, reaching toward the tiled floor's center. The tiles are patterned with faded geometric shapes, each worn in different ways, some smoothed by footsteps, others chipped at the edges. The coolness of the surface seeps pleasantly into your bare feet. From the far wall, the scent of crushed mint drifts toward you. Small clay pots of herbs sit in a neat row along the shaded veranda, their leaves still glistening from the night's dew. You brush your fingers lightly over one of them, releasing a sharper green scent into the air. In the 17th century, wool shawls like yours were not only for warmth but also carried a certain unspoken message about the wearer's household. The weave's tightness, the richness of the dye, and even the way the ends were knotted could quietly indicate a family's trade or connections. Historians still debate whether these details were universally understood symbols or simply local habits, noticed only by those within a village. You adjust the shawl one last time before stepping toward the narrow street beyond your door. The faint sounds of morning, the rooster's last call, the soft thud of a market stall opening follow you out. The well is not far, but the walk there will pass through scents, shadows, and voices that belong only to this hour. You place one foot onto the courtyard tiles and pause, letting the sensation arrive slowly. Cool first, then a slickness so slight it is almost imagined, a whisper of dew that clings to the glaze before surrendering to your skin. Your toes explore the surface as if reading a familiar script, the shallow dip in the center of one square, the faint ridge where another joins, the tiny sand grain caught at a seam that you brush away with the side of your foot. You stand like this for a few breaths, one foot grounded, one hovering, feeling the morning through clay and through skin. When you set your second foot down, the chill doubles and then softens. The tiles are patient. They hold the night's coolness longer than the earthen walls, longer than the low wooden bench that has already warmed beneath the touch of light. You shift your weight from heel to ball, from ball to toes, and the tiles answer with small messages. This one slightly pocked, that one smooth as poured water, another with a hairline crack that has not changed in years. Your eyes take in the simple geometry beneath you, squares within squares, patterns that echo themselves without hurry. A few tiles carry faded colors that once declared themselves openly. Deep cobalt braided with leaf green, a thin line of tawny yellow, and a white that has mellowed into cream. They do not shout now. The sun and the years have asked them to speak softly, and they do. You trace a pale blue border with your gaze until it disappears under the shadow of the veranda. You walk with careful, slow steps across the courtyard. Each footfall makes a hushed sound, a rounded tap that belongs to early hours into cool clay. The tiles are damp where the night air gathered, drier where the open sky left them, driest near the threshold where the breeze always lingers. You move like water, seeking level ground, letting the shawl fall loosely around your shoulders and enjoying the unremarkable ceremony of stepping, pausing, and stepping again. At the courtyard's edge, a narrow channel guides any stray rain away from the living spaces. You remember how, after the last brief shower, The channel brightened for a day as the clay swelled and the glaze looked freshly washed. You step over it now, the arch of your foot feeling the shallow curve and the tiny coolness that still hides there. The air carries a clean mineral scent, as if the tiles themselves have a memory of stream beds and river stones. In cities and prosperous towns, tile work has long found a place on floors, fountains, and walls, a craft shaped over centuries. By the 17th century, many households prized the practical grace of glazed surfaces in courtyards. Easy to clean, slow to drink the heat, and satisfying underfoot. This is a straightforward truth, steady and well attested by travelers and builders alike. Historians still argue whether the more intricate mosaic patterns, the complex interlacing that delights the eye, spread widely into villages at this time, or remained mostly an urban artistry, while simpler laid tiles like these traveled more freely along roads and through markets. You bend to touch one tile with your fingertips, testing the coolness your feet have already learned. Your skin finds the same message your soles received, a fine film of dawn that disappears the moment you touch it, leaving only smooth clay and the hint of last night's air. You rise, and your shawl whispers against the fabric at your hip. At the corner near the herb pots, a small discoloration draws your attention, a faint flower of pale lime, where water always splashes when you fill the basin. The mark is not new, it grows by a leaf's breadth with each season, the mineral trace of well water leaving its quiet memorial on the glaze. You press your big toe to it, as if greeting a familiar neighbor, and then step aside. A pigeon lands on the far parapet, hopping twice, turning its head in the scattered light. The bird watches you with one eye and then the other, as if approving the ceremony of your slow, deliberate crossing. You move again, heel, ball, toe, and the sound of your steps mingles with a faint clatter from beyond the wall, a pot set down, a latch lifted, a voice clearing itself for the day. You pause at the basin. A thin bead of water clings to its rim, catching the first brighter thread of sun and turning it to silver. You run a hand along the basin's edge, and the tile beneath your feet seems to cool a little more, as though jealous of the basin's reflected light. You cup your palm, splash once, and pat your ankles. The chill travels upward in a careful line, waking but not startling. Someone once taught you to sweep the tiles in long, even strokes, always pulling dust toward the channel, never pushing it against the wind. You still follow that rhythm, and the courtyard notices. Dust here moves politely. It settles in corners, accepts the broom's light insistence, and leaves without protest. Now, in the dew-soaked calm, there is nothing to sweep. The tiles are already in their best morning mood, polished by night and quiet. You think of small household habits that belong to these squares of clay. A neighbor says a drop of orange blossom water, flicked toward the center of the courtyard after washing, invites a gentle day. Another insists it only feeds the ants. You have tried it twice, and both times the morning felt lighter, though perhaps that was simply because you stood there longer, waiting for the scent to rise. Such little customs persist without needing to prove themselves. They ask almost nothing and give the smallest pleasing return. At the threshold to the alley, you stop. There is a transition here that your feet know intimately, from the smooth discipline of tile to the soft drift of dust where the lane begins. You press your toes against the final row, memorize the cool, and then lift. The dew has retreated from most of the courtyard now, leaving a few darkened patches that will soon turn the same mild color as the rest. You look back and see the faint prints you have made, a lightly darker path that curves from your sleeping mat side to the door, then across to the basin, and back to where you stand. They already begin to vanish. You draw one more breath, full and unhurried. The tiles, the basin, the herb pots, the patient pigeon, all of them keep their places as if they have always been here, and will continue after you step away. The day will warm, the cool will lift. You accept this with the soft nod you reserve for truths that do not need explanation. Then you cross the line from tile to dust, your soles accepting the change without complaint, the shawl settling against your arms, and the courtyard holding the quiet of your footsteps as if it were water in a shallow bowl. The first thing to greet you is the scent. It drifts toward you in the stillness, sharp and green, with the faintest sweetness underneath mint leaves from the clay pots along the shaded veranda. Their stems lean slightly toward the light, the smaller leaves curled inward as if still waking, the larger ones fanning wide to catch the morning air. You step closer, the cool shadow stretching over your bare feet, and the fragrance deepens. It is both fresh and familiar, the kind of scent that carries the memory of countless mornings just like this. You run your fingers lightly along the topmost leaves of one pot. The surface is cool, damp from the night's breath, and when you press a little, the green oils release instantly. Your fingertips carry that brightness now, and you bring them near your nose without thinking, letting the mint clear the edges of your mind. The clay pot itself is rough to the touch, its rim slightly uneven where the glaze thins, and inside, the soil is still dark with moisture. The veranda's shadow is a quiet refuge. Above, the wooden beams hold their own scent, dry cedar, with a faint trace of the smoke that has risen here from kitchen fires over the years. The beams are bound with lengths of reed and palm frond, their texture softened by dust, yet still showing the mark of the hands that set them in place. You know each imperfection, each tiny chip in the clay ledge beneath the pots, as well as you know the path to the well. From beyond the courtyard wall, you catch the muffled knock of a pestle against a mortar, someone grinding spices, the rhythm unhurried and steady. The sound pairs easily with the lazy cooing of a pigeon that has chosen the veranda's edge as its perch. A soft flutter of wings follows as the bird adjusts itself, tilting its head to eye you, then returning to its watch over the lane. In the 17th century, mint grew easily in Moroccan courtyards, thriving in clay pots that could be shifted to catch or escape the sun as the seasons turned. This is a plain fact, noted by travelers and gardeners alike. More curious, though, is the claim that mint leaves placed under one's pillow could ward off restless dreams, a detail mentioned in only a few surviving household records. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread custom or merely a poetic exaggeration repeated by a handful of visitors enchanted by the plant's scent. The breeze moves just enough to stir the mint leaves so they whisper against one another. The sound is almost like running water, quick and light, gone as soon as you try to hold it. You glance at the row of pots, some holding only a few short stems, others full and thick with green. A small black ant navigates the rim of one pot, its path steady until it disappears into the soil's shadow. You step past the row, brushing your shawl against the clay. The shade ends in a thin line where sunlight spills across the courtyard floor, warming the tiles in pale gold. The scent of mint lingers behind you, faint now but still sharp enough to follow you into the lane. It will stay in your senses until the smell of bread and dust begins to take over. You adjust the rope on your shoulder and step into the morning's growing light, the well a little nearer now. You meet your first neighbor at the turn of the lane. She appears the way she always does at this hour, quiet, sure-footed, already settled into the day as if the morning were a garment she put on in the dark, without needing a lamp. The clay jar on her head is empty. You can tell by the way it rides high and steady, the base resting on a coiled cloth ring that flattens gently against her hair. Her free hand swings with an unhurried rhythm. The other lies lightly against the jar's side, as if remembering it might need help, but discovering again that it does not. You greet one another the way neighbors do when there is nothing urgent to say. A small tilt of the chin, a soft hello shaped more by breath than voice. The lane here is narrow, its walls close enough that the cool night air still clings at ankle height, while your shoulders feel the first clean brush of sun. Your neighbor pauses, not to speak, but to let the quiet settle just a little deeper before moving on. The jar's surface is rough, where the potter's hands left faint ridges. Unglazed clay keeps water cooler by breathing a useful truth that everyone knows without needing to measure it. When full, such jars sweat a little, and the thin dampness on their sides steals heat from the air. You both know this in your bones. You feel it every summer when the jar becomes a small afternoon mercy in the shaded corner of a room. You ask with your eyes if her household needs much today. She answers with a small roll of her wrist that means enough, but not heavy. And you both understand that this is a fortunate answer. There are days when the jar must be filled twice, even 3 times, for cooking, washing, and the thirsty dust that insists on a sprinkling to quiet itself in the courtyard. Today will be ordinary. Ordinary is good. She shifts her weight, and the jar leans with her, obeying the logic of balance that lives somewhere between neck and spine. The coiled ring, a simple twist of cloth, stitched into a circle, holds the jar in the smallest cradle. Some people use braided palm fiber instead, a light crown smoothed with years. Others prefer folded wool that gives like a cushion. Your neighbor's ring has a faint stain on one segment where olive oil once touched it, leaving a darker crescent that never quite washed out. A fringe story floats in with your memory, told by an aunt who tells many such stories, that a smear of olive oil along a jar's rim can keep the clay from chafing the head ring and quiet the tiniest grinding sound during a long walk. It is not a rule, only a small trick some households try. Whether it helps or merely softens the mind to the task hardly matters. It harms nothing, and oil is friendly to almost every ordinary problem. You cherish the plainness of your exchange. The words that pass are household words, small and serviceable. Sleep, the well, the cue, the bread. Nothing requires attention beyond the reach of your day. You are aware, in a distant, untroubling way, that such walks have happened here longer than any person now living can remember. Travelers speak of wells the way they speak of gates and markets, as simple anchors that fix a place in the mind. A swallow draws a thin line across the sky above you, then disappears behind a roof. Your neighbor adjusts the hem of her wrap with a small toe nudge so it clears the dust, then resumes her pace. You fall into step beside her, two shadows stretching like ribbons along the wall, then gathering again where the lane bends. The empty jar shifts once, twice, then stills with the next breath. She mentions the baker, not by name, but by the sound of his door. You know which door she means, the one that always catches and then thumps softly. A door that announces the first trays of flat loaves without needing human voice. You listen now and hear it faintly, and with it, a drift of warm yeast and smoke that finds you even here, around this corner. Your neighbor smiles without showing teeth, the small expression people reserve for good, ordinary news. You come to the place where two alleys cross like threads on a loom. Light pools here, more generous than elsewhere, and dusk turns briefly to gold before settling back to its regular color. A boy hurries past with a bundle of kindling tied in palm strips. He glances up at the jar, then at you, then at the ground again, as if the coexistence of all three jar, neighbors, dust, requires a quick inventory. You step aside, and the three of you pass without touching, an arrangement practiced countless times. There are head loads you do not take, the raw stones for building, the weighty baskets of pressed olives, the long timbers for beams. Those belong to other rhythms. Water, though, is counted among the good burdens necessary. Known, steady, your neighbor's steps prove it. She places her feet with the mild care of someone who is carried enough to learn that effort does not ask for hurry. Local names for the head ring drift between households and seasons. Some call it simply the circle, others the cushion. Others still borrow a word from a different town and keep it for a generation. Historians still argue whether such carrying pads were universal in rural Maghrib during the 17th century, or whether their use varied by region and by the materials at hand, appearing in some places as woven palm crowns and in others as folded wool alone. The record is ordinary enough that it seldom drew careful description while it was common. Your neighbor's jar bears a small maker's sign near the base two pressed lines that cross at a shallow angle. The mark is not a signature in the way scribes sign their names. It is more a habit of the potter's fingers, a way to recognize a kiln's work in the market. Once, you saw two nearly identical jars leaning against a stall. The potter tapped them lightly and said one would sing a little when filled because the clay there was denser. You did not hear the song yourself, but you agreed that water sometimes has its own music against certain sides. She lifts her chin a finger's width to settle the empty weight. You notice a faint oval of lighter skin where the ring often rests, no thicker than a fingernail, and think briefly of calluses the body develops for its regular tasks. Hands callous where ropes run, shoulders thicken where baskets ride. A narrow crown of the head learns patience beneath a jar. These are quiet changes, not demanded by pride, only by repetition. Ahead, the lane opens like a mouth to a small square where sunlight gathers as if it prefers to linger near people. You can already hear the first voices near the well, the low, rounded tones of greeting. A scrape of wood against stone, the modest discipline of a cue forming itself without any need to be named. Your neighbor's steps align with the sound, as if following an old drum that only the morning can hear. You speak once more, asking if she will stay long after filling. She answers that she will linger for a few breaths, perhaps a little more, to trade news about the price of almonds and whether the last rain did anything useful. It is not real news. It is the soft weave that holds days together and makes the weight lighter. You nod. The well is a place to work and also a place to rest the mind. When the square appears fully, she gives you the smallest wave and peels away toward a gap in the line where a friend, seeing her jar, has made a space. She settles there without stepping ahead, only sliding into the shape that was already hers. The jar on her head remains perfectly upright, a small promise of balance kept once again. You feel the rope on your shoulder, course against the shawl, and step forward. The first neighbor is greeted. The next moments belong to wood, stone, and water. The morning continues with its ordinary wisdom. You lift your eyes to the pale rim of morning. The lane narrows the sky into a long blue ribbon, the edges cut straight by mud brick walls and flat roofs. You stop where the alley bends and tip your head back, letting your gaze move slowly from one roofline to the other, searching the emptiness for any sign of threads, wisps, or the low-bellied shapes that promise a shaded noon. The light is still cool. The color is not yet decisive. You stand as if measuring a cloth, patient and without hurry. A swallow flickers through the gap and is gone. Behind it, the sky remains mostly unmarked, a clean field. You are practiced at this small inspection. You do not name the shapes like a scholar. You watch them the way a baker watches dough, with the quiet knowledge of someone who must live with the result. Thin brushstrokes that stretch and vanish mean nothing yet. A single gray veil spreading from the west means the sun will soften. Low, heavy mounds rolling in from the sea, those, if they arrive at all, carry a day that listens. The rooftops around you are edged with pots, mint, basil, a fig cutting coaxed to root, a stubborn rosemary that refuses to be hurried. Their leaves barely stir. The morning is uncomplicated. Farther off, the higher roof of a wealthy house carries a small parapet, and beyond that, the true horizon appears, faint and pale. You squint, not to force a sign, but to become sure that there is not one. You think of water while you look for clouds. It is difficult not to. In your mind, the well and the sky sit beside each other on a bench like old friends who speak rarely but understand everything. Some years their conversation is lively, and the jars grow heavy without complaint. Some years it thins to polite nods, and the rope bites more deeply into hands and shoulders. You keep looking. A small breath of air moves along the alley, unrolling a thin ribbon of dust that settles almost at once. The smell it carries is bright and stony, with the faintest memory of last season's rain still hidden inside it like a seed. You hold that scent for a heartbeat before it leaves again. Over the wall to your right, a child's giggle rises and fades. You return to the sky, which offers you more of the same. Pale, blue, fair, undecided, a plain, steady truth. In the 17th century, households across Morocco relied on communal wells and cisterns, rain gathered from roofs and courtyards and held in belly, deep reservoirs for later patience. Travelers wrote of such stores as if they were living creatures calm when full, sharp-tempered when low, and the builders who lined them in lime knew they were a family's second stomach. This you know without needing the travelers. Your own courtyard keeps a small clay jar in its coolest corner for the same reason, a modest echo of larger care. You let your gaze drift to the west, where sometimes, if the season is generous, clouds form in low bands that smudge the horizon like charcoal. Today there is only a pale suggestion, too faint to count. Somewhere a neighbor coughs. Somewhere else a door pinches the air with its familiar scrape. A rooster late to the task announces himself as if the morning required formal permission. You smile without showing teeth, then return to studying the sky as if it owes you an answer. There are small sayings for this hour, the kind people repeat without demanding proof. A high, thin veil means patience. Broken cotton means shade by noon. A dustless dawn means the well will be busy. Your grandmother favored one in particular, that swallows fly low before a gentler day, high before a hard one. You watch for a second swallow to test the saying, though you admit you simply like to watch them. Change or no change. A fringe habit you once saw on the edge of a field returns to you now. A woman tied a thin strip of undyed cloth to the lowest branch of a young almond tree and whispered toward the horizon, then left the cloth to flutter until the wind took it. She said the cloth would teach the tree the sky's language, and the sky, charmed by such small listening, might speak more often. You remember the fluttering more than the words. No one forbids such things. They neither cost nor wound. They simply keep company with hope. You step forward 2 paces to change the frame of the alley and find a longer slice of the east. The color there is beginning to brighten into wheat straw, and then into something that wants to become gold. The edges of the roofs glow as if stroked by a wet brush. A tiny, almost invisible thread appears far off, too thin to name, too easy to lose if you look away. You keep your eyes on it until it dissolves into the larger brightness, and then you accept its leaving. The well-keeper sometimes calls the morning by the sky's taste: salt on the wind if the sea is speaking, ash if hills have burned, metal if a storm means to arrive from a great distance. You are not certain you can tell these flavors as he claims to, though on certain days you believe you do. Historians still argue whether rural households in this century commonly consulted written almanacs in city sieges for weather and planting, or relied almost entirely on remembered sayings, the positions of stars by habit, and the older calendars kept in mouth and mind. The city scribes write, the lanes observe. Both claim wisdom, and both continue. To your left, an elderly man appears on a nearby roof, his silhouette short against the light. He shakes a folded mat with slow dignity, then lays it along the parapet to remember the sun. He too glances at the sky, not with worry, but with the mild interest one gives to a visitor who may or may not knock. You lift a hand in greeting. He returns it without hurry. These exchanges are as reliable as shadows. You look once more to the west. There, a small, torn cluster, so thin it could be mistaken for stray smoke, drifts above the distant roofs. You test its movement against a corner of plaster. It advances a finger's width and then pauses. Not a promise, exactly. More like a gently raised eyebrow. You accept the half-message and turn your face back to the path. The rope on your shoulder shifts with your breath. Its fibers have their own weather, a dry roughness that can be made kinder with the smallest rub of tallow, a habit you remember when the skin complains. You roll your shoulder once, settle the coil more comfortably, and step forward. The lane's dust takes your prints and then loosens them, reducing each step to a softer version of itself. Overhead, the sky continues its plain work of brightening, generous but undecorated. You will cross 2 more turns before the well comes into view. Between here and there, you will pass the olive press and then the baker's door. If the faint western shreds decide to gather, you may find a shade that did not belong to the morning when it began. If not, the day will be the day you expected, mild, honest, and without confusion. You are at ease with either. Water waits for the arm, the sky for the eye. Both are patient with those who practice them daily. You glance up one last time, not demanding, only asking. The answer is the same. A clear field, with a few faint questions scribbled at its edge. Good enough. You begin to walk, taking the morning with you the way you would carry a folded cloth, ordinary, useful, and exactly the right weight. You shift the coil of rope and feel its intention immediately. It is not heavy yet. It is simply present, a dry, fibrous certainty, pressing against your collarbone and announcing the work to come. You lift it from the wall peg in one slow pull, and the strands rasp together with a whisper like reeds rubbing in a light wind. Bits of dust, fine as flour, rise and settle again before they can reach your nose. The shawl softens the first touch, but the rope is honest. Even through wool, you feel its pattern, the small ridges laid into it by hands and twist. You bring the loop across your shoulder, crossing your chest, then pass the free end under your arm so it will not swing. The coarse fibers leave faint tracks on your skin where the shawl slips. It is a familiar stippling that will fade after the walk. But for now, it is a map of little hills and small valleys, a quiet reminder that the day is textured. The rope smells of dry plant, sun, and a stubborn hint of last season's tallow. When you press your thumb along one strand, you can still feel a waxy ghost where someone once tried to make it kinder. Rope is a simple thing that gathers many places into itself. In these parts, it is often made from what the hands have nearest: the long, patient fibers of date, palm leaf stalks, the tough, clean strands of halfa grass that a traveler might call esparto. Sometimes, when a market has been lively, hemp that has seen a journey before it reaches your lane, twisted, doubled, and laid again. The cords learn to behave like one creature. They drink a little water in their youth, and then learn restraint, holding themselves against the pull of buckets and the grind of wood. This is a steady fact, shared by wells and boats and presses alike. You run 2 fingers along the lay of the rope, following the spiral as if counting breaths. Each crossing tells you where the next will be. You have known ropes that were quarrelsome loose in the twist, eager to flatten, always catching on the lip of a jar. This one is better behaved. It is the well's own, kept near the winch most days, but you carry your length to be sure of a clean stretch and out of habit. Households here do not wander empty, handed toward water. On the wall near the peg, someone has marked the rope with a thumbprint of faded dye. It might be henna left over from a celebration, pressed there on a cheerful afternoon. It might be mulberry juice from a careless hand. A small fringe custom says a colored pinch every arm's length will keep the rope from twisting too proudly when wet. Whether the dye instructs the cord or only distracts the mind, you cannot say, but the marks please the eye and make counting easy. Historians still argue whether such careful little habits, colored knots, braided charms, a bead of blue glass near the bucket, were common in rural wells of this century, or are mostly the embroidery of later memory, repeated because it is tender to remember. You settle the coil more firmly, the strands warm against the shawl in the time it takes to take 3 slow steps. Ropes are happiest when kept in a modest shade and allowed to dry without hurry. A keeper once told you that a rope scolded by the sun becomes brittle in the sole, and while you do not weigh soles for fibers, you have met ropes that snapped as if insulted. The well keeper rubs this one now and then with a whisper of tallow where it rides the wooden wheel. The sheen there is only a dull dark, no more than a memory of grease. At the alley's corner, you pause to let the coil settle in a better lie across your chest. Your palm slides over the rope, and you feel the places where small splinters of plant fiber stand up like ungentle hair. Your skin knows how to negotiate. It presses, it yields, it changes its angle by a finger's width. The rope teaches patience without speaking. You learn again without protest. You think briefly of how the well's rope speaks with the wood. The pulley, really, a wheel with a groove, mounted on a beam polished by arms that have leaned there for years, answers with its own language. Rope and wheel talk in little groans and low murmurs, the kind a house knows in winter when beams breathe and doors sigh. You have come to hear safety in those sounds, as a sailor hears truth in a hull. If the voice of wood becomes sharp, you listen twice. If the rope grows silent, you check the lay for a twist that isn't friendly. A plain, mainstream truth sits easily in your mind as you walk. Unglazed water jars and well ropes are companions. The one keeps the water cool by breathing. The other survives by not soaking too greedily. Many households keep a spare coil in the coolest corner, lifted on 2 pegs so air can dry it all around and mice must think twice. You have helped do this yourself, turning the rope like bread so each side can receive its share of the room's calm. You once saw a trader demonstrate a neat trick. He struck a rope against a stone and listened to the tone as if it were a lute string. A healthy, well-twisted rope, he said, would answer with a small, clear note. A tired, slack one would cough and thud. You tried it after he left and convinced yourself you heard the difference. The memory returns now, and for a silly heartbeat, you consider tapping the coil against the alley wall. You do not. You believe the rope will prove itself in its actual work. Your shoulder makes its small complaints and then quiets. The skin always speaks first. The deeper places wait until later. You roll your neck once, keeping your gaze level. The rope presses a line along your collarbone that will linger until the first cup of water touches your lip back home. You know that moment in advance, the slight sting, the coolness running under the line, the relief as the mark fades. It is one of the unremarkable kindnesses of the day. Not all wells are pleased with the same ropes. Some prefer a thinner cord that runs lightly without asking much of the wheel. Others like a thicker lay that grips and resists, believing somehow that friction is a kind of honesty. The well you are walking toward favors a middle course. The keeper once tried a tarred marine rope bought off a traveler who swore by it for distant coasts. It ran smooth and gave off a distant scent like burned sugar and pine. But here, in this square, the tar felt foreign. It left black kisses on fingers and jars. The keeper went back to tallow and plant fiber after a week, and no one complained. Historians still debate whether pitch-treated ropes were ever common inland or remained mostly a coastal habit following harbors and river towns where such goods flowed easiest. A child darts by and, with the seriousness only children possess, asks if the rope bites. You answer that it does, but only a little, and only if you argue with it. This satisfies him. He touches the coil with one finger, decides it is less interesting than it looks, and skips ahead, chasing a bird that has no intention of being caught. The square is near now. Your hands anticipate the change from carrying to hauling. You let the free end swing forward once, testing its balance, then catch it again. The rope answers by settling, then waiting. You think of how your hands will find their places on the coarse lay, how the first pull will feel light, then gathering, then properly weighted as the bucket drinks. Your palms already begin to prepare themselves, drying slightly, asking for grit, asking for the old rhythm that turns effort into a series of polite negotiations. You breathe once more, deep and unhurried. The rope is a simple companion, not affectionate, not cruel, only useful. It will do its work, and you will do yours. And together, you will lift a mirrored circle from a dark throat and bring it into the day. You take the turn, and the olive press comes into view. It sits low and broad beside the lane, its round stone wheel leaning into the morning like a shoulder that has worked too long to need instruction. The press is silent now, the wooden beam resting in its cradle, but even in stillness it smells of its own labor, a deep, dark scent of crushed fruit, bitter leaves, and oil clinging to wood. The ground around it is marked with half-moons of stain, where jars once rested to be filled, and where the slow, golden threads of oil might have missed their mark. The stone wheel is modeled in pale and dark grays, its surface scratched and polished by years of circling against the basin's floor. You can see where the edges have been smoothed into an almost gentle curve, as if the stone has learned to be kind to its work. The basin itself is carved from a single block, wide and shallow, its rim chipped in a few places where a careless jar once tapped too hard. A wooden pole, thick as your thigh, runs from the wheel's center to a post, the joint bound in layers of rope and leather that look like they were cut from the same hide decades apart. You step closer, letting your hand brush the beam. It is warm already, having caught the earliest sun, and the wood holds the faint scent of oil even where it has been scrubbed. The press will be busy again soon. The season has been good for olives, and the baskets have been arriving heavier than last year. You think briefly of the afternoons when this space is alive, the wheel turning with the steady patience of a camel or a pair of men, the low creak of the pole, the soft splash as the green-gold liquid runs from the spout into a waiting jar. It is a plain truth that olive presses like this one have been part of village life here for centuries. In the 17th century, they were often built near wells or streams, where water could be fetched for washing the pulp and keeping the work cool. The oil, once drawn, would be stored in glazed jars or goatskin bags, traded in the market for grain, cloth, or more olives from farther afield. Some travelers rode of entire lanes smelling of nothing but oil for weeks at a time, the air thick with its sweetness. As you pause, you notice a fringe detail few outsiders care for. Small flat stones laid in a line beside the basin, their tops polished by bare feet. These are the waiting stones, where workers stand while the wheel turns, their toes curling over the edges for balance. An old keeper once told you that stepping on the same stone every day gives a person's foot a memory, and that the stone remembers too. Whether this is truth or an old man's poetry, you have never minded believing it. Historians still argue whether these small arrangements were common in every press or simply the habit of certain villages where the ground was uneven. The air here is different from the lane, heavier, as if the press keeps the night's warmth longer. You take a slow breath and taste the faint bitterness that always sits at the back of fresh oil. It is not unpleasant. It is the kind of taste that speaks of work, of something pulled patiently from the earth. Your palm still carries a faint trace of rope dust, and when you touch the beam again, the two scents mix in a way that feels like the essence of the square ahead: wood, fiber, fruit, stone. You step around the press, your sandals crunching lightly on grit, scattered from the last unloading. A single crushed olive skin lies near the basin, its green now darkened to almost black. The flies have not yet found it in this early hour. You resist the small urge to brush it away. It will be gone by noon, one way or another. Beyond the press, the lane widens a little, and you can see the pale top edge of the well's wall catching light. The press will be behind you soon, its stillness replaced by the more fluid work of water. You take one last look at the beam, imagining it lifting and turning again, the slow rotation drawing circles into the air, as if marking time. You shift the rope on your shoulder and continue toward the well, the scent of oil following you for a few paces before giving way again to dust, air, and the faint sound of voices ahead. A sudden burst of movement scatters the dust at your feet. Two barefoot children dart across the lane, chasing a small, panicked hen whose wings flap without lifting her more than a hand's height from the ground. The bird zigzags between them, head low, eyes wide, her beak opening in silent protest. The children laugh in high, uneven bursts, their steps quick and careless, sending up thin clouds that hang in the early light. The first child, taller and faster, lunges with both hands outstretched but misses, catching only the air stirred by feathers. The second slows just enough to glance back at you, a quick, mischievous look before springing forward again. The hen veers sharply toward the wall, then doubles back, forcing her pursuers to stumble into each other with a thud. Their laughter doubles, louder now, echoing against the mud brick walls. You pause to watch, not because you expect the chase to end soon, but because it feels like a scene the morning insists upon showing you. The rope on your shoulder shifts slightly as you lean against the wall, the roughness at your collarbone warming with the pause. A faint breeze swirls the dust their feet have unsettled, carrying with it the faint scent of feathers, dry, warm, and faintly grassy, like the smell of a basket left in the sun. The hen, perhaps realizing the space ahead is clear, darts toward the narrow gap between a leaning water jar and the wall. She disappears behind it, and the children stop short, leaning to see where she's gone. One crouches, peering into the gap. The other stands over him, hands on hips, as if waiting for the verdict. Whatever they see, it makes them grin in agreement. They stand together, their hunt abandoned for now, and wander down the lane in the opposite direction, still talking over each other in the easy, unguarded way of siblings or friends. It is a plain truth that hens in a 17th-century Moroccan village are not only common but valuable eggs for the table, meat for the pot when the time comes, feathers for pillows or the occasional charm. Children know this without needing to be told, but they also know that chasing a hen is not truly about catching it. It is about the running, the dust, the proof that the day has begun. A smaller fringe belief lingers in the edges of memory, that a hen wandering across your path on the way to fetch water is a quiet sign of luck, especially if it walks ahead of you for a few steps without looking back. Whether this is taken seriously or simply repeated for the pleasure of saying it, no one agrees. Historians still argue whether such sayings traveled with traders along caravan routes or grew independently in villages like seeds sprouting in similar soil. The dust the children left behind settles slowly, each grain finding its way to rest on the packed earth or along the thin ledges at the base of the walls. You watch the motes drift in the light, turning gold where the sun catches them. Somewhere in the distance, the hen lets out a short, sharp call, not quite alarm, not quite satisfaction. You step forward again, your own pace unchanged. The lane here is quieter now, the sound of the children's laughter fading into the larger hum of the square ahead. The well is close enough that you can hear it clearly, the creak of the wooden wheel, the faint splash of a bucket meeting water far below. the low exchange of voices between those waiting their turn. One last feather flutters in the air beside you before settling onto the ground. You leave it where it lands, trusting the breeze to decide where it belongs next. The lane bends once more, and the market begins to reveal itself. It is still early the hour when awnings are only half unrolled, their cloth edges stirring lazily in the breeze. The colors are muted now, not yet brightened by full light. Deep reds, worn indigo, the yellow of old saffron sacks folded neatly in the corner of a stall. The air carries a mixed breath: dates, almonds, dried figs, and the faint sting of freshly split cumin seeds. You pass the first stall, where baskets of almonds sit in neat pyramids, each nut pale and smooth, the work of many careful hands. Beside them, a small scoop of carved wood rests on a folded cloth, waiting for the first sale. The stallholder, a man with a turban tied low against his brow, nods once in greeting before returning to the task of pinning the corner of his awning to a wooden post. The post is dark where the cloth has rubbed it season after season, polished in some places, fraying in others. Across the way, a date seller is shaking dust from his cloth mat. The dates themselves are not yet displayed. They remain in their baskets, covered to keep the morning flies at bay, but the sweet, heavy scent of them still finds its way into the lane. You catch it between steps, and it lingers a moment longer than expected. The seller's young son sits cross-legged nearby, stacking small ceramic cups for tea that will be poured later, when the market finds its full voice. It is a steady fact that by the 17th century, village markets in Morocco served as much as gathering places for news and greetings as they did for trade. Goods moved slowly in and out: almonds from nearby groves, dates from farther south, spices from caravans that might arrive only a few times a year. Even a small market like this one could smell of far-off places without a single traveler in sight. One small, curious detail clings to this hour. Some vendors, before setting out their wares, will circle their stall once with a handful of dried herbs, letting the scent drift along the edges of the cloth and the goods. They say it is to invite customers, though whether the herbs persuade the people or simply please the vendor is left unspoken. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread habit or a collection of local superstitions tied to specific markets. You move slowly past a spice stall, where shallow trays hold mounds of ground-color ochre, turmeric, deep red paprika, the muted green of dried mint. The air here is thicker, as if the powder itself refuses to stay in the trays, preferring to float out and mix with the breath of anyone passing by. The stallholder is bent over, using a flat piece of reed to smooth the surface of each pile, the movement small and even, the way one might level soil before planting. A hen clucks somewhere nearby, perhaps the same from before, perhaps another, and a cart's wooden wheel squeaks as it turns into place at the far edge of the square. The rope on your shoulder shifts with your steps, brushing lightly against the folds of your shawl. You feel the faint pull of anticipation. The well is close enough now that the air carries its cool echo. Even before you see the stone lip, a vendor calls softly to a neighbor, asking about the price of salt. Their voices weave through the air like threads in an unfinished cloth. Not urgent, not slow, simply part of the pattern of the morning. You pass between them and the next row of stalls, your own pace steady, your eyes already lifting toward the space ahead, where the market ends and the well begins. The first thing you notice is the circle of light. It rests on the stone lip of the well, a pale gold that seems to thicken as the sun lifts higher. The stone itself is worn smooth in some places, pitted in others, a record of centuries of hands, ropes, and buckets passing over it. The air here is different, cooler, touched by the faint breath rising from the water far below. You step into the square and let your eyes take in the space, the well at its center, like the calm heart of a slow conversation. The well's wall is built of stones carefully fitted together, their seams tight enough to keep the shape but wide enough to show their individuality. Some stones are pale, others darker, almost green, with the memory of moss that once clung to them. The rim stands at the height of your waist, a height that asks you to lean just slightly when drawing water, to bring your weight into the work without straining. The wooden frame above holds the pulley, a wheel blackened in parts, where the rope has worn it smooth. A few shallow grooves run along the rim, evidence of ropes past, each one leaving its own handwriting on the wood. From the wheel's center, a single iron pin holds the axis steady, its head polished bright from years of turning. A thin squeak sounds with each shift of the breeze as the wheel rocks minutely in its cradle. It is a plain truth that wells like this one were central to 17th century Moroccan village life, often marking the meeting place for trade, news, and small ceremonies. A well might be dug so deep that its water outlasted seasons of poor rain, or so shallow that it relied on the kindness of the sky each year. This one, is a generous well deep enough to give in lean seasons, sweet enough to drink without boiling, a quiet blessing in stone and shadow. One fringe habit you recall seeing here many times. When someone draws the first bucket of the morning, they pour a small cupful onto the ground beside the well, letting it sink into the earth. Some say it is for the roots of unseen trees, others for the spirits of the place, still others simply because the first pull is never the clearest. Historians still argue whether such gestures were purely practical or carried a layer of ritual that time has thinned but not erased. A few people stand in a loose curve around the well, each with a jar, bucket, or skin waiting its turn. The sound of voices is soft, respectful, like the low murmur inside a cool room. The well-keeper, a man in a faded turban, leans on the winch handle, nodding now and then to someone he knows, which is nearly everyone. His hands rest lightly on the wood, the way one rests a hand on the shoulder of a familiar friend. The rope on your shoulder feels more purposeful here. You step closer, joining the line at its far end. The stone beneath your feet is worn into shallow dips by centuries of similar pauses, and you shift slightly to find a spot where the slope of the surface feels steady. The air from the well is cool and faintly metallic, carrying with it the scent of stone and water that has not seen the sun in months. Your eyes trace the slow movement at the front of the line. A bucket rising, its wet shadow sliding up the inner wall. A trickle of water spilling back into the dark. The pulley groans softly as the keeper eases the rope over the wheel. A moment later, the bucket clears the rim, swinging slightly, scattering droplets onto the stone lip. They darken the surface for a moment before disappearing into the heat of the day. You wait, the sound of the water echoing faintly in your ears, each splash and creak a reminder that your turn will come soon. You learn the cue the way you learn a familiar song, not by counting beats, but by letting the rhythm arrive through your bones. You step to the gentle curve that is formed along the well's rim and set your jar just ahead of your toes, not touching the stone, only near enough to declare your place. No one needs to say where the line begins or ends. The jars speak for their owners like soft, patient voices. A clay bucket with a patched lip waits behind a woven skin that smells faintly of goat. A small brass pot, no larger than a helmet, stands between two taller jars, as confidently as a child between elders. The well-keeper glances along the array and tilts his chin. He has read the line and judged its sound. The space feels orderly, without feeling strict. A woman 2 places ahead of you shifts her jar a hand's breadth to make room for an older man whose gait has a memory of injury. Someone behind you nods in approval. In this square, kindness is not a performance. It is simply a habit repeated until it becomes furniture. You place the coil of rope at your feet. The fibers make a shallow ring in the dust, and you press one heel lightly into it to keep the rope from wandering under step. The shawl loosens at your neck. A single thread pulls free, a little bright hair against the duller wool, and you roll it back with your thumb. The stone ledge is cool, where the well's breath climbs and spills over. Your fingers rest there without thinking, then lift again so you will not lose the chill too soon. Around you, voices weave themselves into a low cloth. No one pushes words forward. They arrive and settle like doves on a ledge. The price of barley is a thread. The rumor of a caravan stalled by a late flood is another, thinner thread. Whether the baker will finish earlier today because of the heat becomes a small knot, teased and smoothed and forgotten. A boy repeats a joke he does not fully understand, and is rewarded with a gentle laugh that saves his pride. It is a steady, well-attested truth that communal wells like this were more than water. They were small institutions. In the 17th century, many were maintained as charitable endowments, wake for the repairs, and bucket ropes supplied from income set aside for the purpose, so that a village would not thirst when a single household's purse ran thin. Travelers wrote of keepers who kept small ledgers for oil to soothe the axle, for lime to seal the inner stones, for the wages of a mason when the wall needed a new tooth. The memory of such care lingers even if the ledger itself has long since gone to dust. A fringe tidbit lives in the queue like a small joke with a history. Some families keep a place stone, a smooth river pebble carried in the pocket and set before the jar when errands multiply. The pebble, rubbed dark by fingers, is known among neighbors, honored as if it were the jar's small cousin. You have seen this once or twice, the stone set with a tiny seriousness that makes the act almost ceremonial. Whether it began as convenience or charm is unclear, but the pebble always returns to the pocket at the end, warmed by the hour. Historians still argue whether such tokens belonged properly to your century or slipped into recollection from later habits, mistaken for older customs because they pleased the tellers. The keeper raises the handle, and the wheel answers with its morning voice, a worn, good-natured groan that says everything is in order. The rope rubs the groove. The bucket begins its descent, and those at the front lean in without stepping closer, as if listening could help the water rise. You feel the sound more than hear it, a low hum that moves through the wood to the stone, then through the stone to the soles of your feet. The bucket meets the surface. A dull, rounded splash answers from somewhere deep and cool. Someone ahead of you arranges her scarf with a flick that reveals the gift of long practice. One motion that makes 3 adjustments. A child at her side holds a reed cup with both hands, not out of need but out of pride. He will not drink first. He will simply be present for the moment when a cup is dipped and lifted. The cup's rim is chipped. The chip is smooth. Proof that what is broken can also be finished by time. You study the ground as much as the people. The stone apron around the well is worn into shallow bowls by years of stance, left foot here, right foot there. A place for the jar to rest in shade. Another for it to stand in sun when the line is long. A thin stain arcs from the lip to the apron where a bucket always drips as it is swung in. A small river that forms each morning and dries by noon. On the apron's edge, a semicircle of darker stone tells where 100 jars have been dragged that last hand's breadth when muscles grew impatient. A woman behind you clears her throat softly and asks whether the olive press seems busier than last season. You answer without turning a quiet yes and add that the waiting stones by the beam look more polished than you remember. She nods in the sound alone. You do not need to see each other's faces. Conversation at the well is like the path of the rope. Smooth where it must be, resting where it can be, never knotted unless necessary. You think of the small rules that no one wrote. Jars rest on the low side of the rim, never on the high. Wet hands are wiped on aprons, not on the pulley's beam. If a stranger arrives, someone with 2 good arms offers to draw for them at least once. If a bucket falls, no one laughs unless the owner laughs first. If someone's rope has begun to fray, a neighbor will run a spare length over the wheel for that morning's work. In this place, skill is not boasted. It is lent. A mainstream fact moves through your mind while you wait. Households here, as everywhere in the Maghrib, draw water for many lives besides their own, for dough, for washing, for animals that speak with their eyes. The well's water runs into clay jars, into leather skins, into wooden troughs, whose rims are polished by tongues and by time. On feast days, more is drawn, and the square shimmers with rinsed stones. On fasting days, the line stretches and thins according to the sun's mood. At your feet, your rope lies patient. You lift the coil and measure a span with your hands, letting the twist run across your palms so your skin remembers the task. A small boy watching does the same with an imaginary rope and smiles when you catch him doing it. You reward him by exaggerating the motion once, showing how the rope must be offered to the wheel like bread to an oven, firmly, without apology. A rumor passes that a man visiting from a hill village uses a leather token to tally draws 1 notch for each bucket he takes on dry weeks, repaid later with work at the keeper's door. Some nod at the sense of it, others insist there has never been counting here, only remembering. Historians still argue whether such rationing tokens appeared in rural wells of this century or belonged to leaner years that came later, when memory needed more help from things that could be held in the hand. The well itself does not weigh opinions. It weighs buckets. Your turn creeps nearer by half a jar and then by another half. The sun has moved a palm's width up the wall, and with it the circle of light on the rim grows brighter, as if polished from within. A hawk writes a narrow line high above the square. The line fades before anyone below finishes their next sentence. Somewhere at the edge of the market, a cart settles into place with a wooden sigh. The keeper meets your eye for a moment, the tiny signal that your time is about to unfold. He lifts his palm in the easiest of invitations. The jar before you is hoisted and filled. Its owner wipes the rim with a scrap of cloth and steps away with the modest pride of someone who has done a necessary thing properly. Without stepping into anyone's shadow, you ready your rope. You reach forward and let your fingertips rest on the stone rim once more, claiming the cool as if it were a modest privilege. The queue behind you breathes in a little. The queue ahead breathes out. The well waits, old and awake. You feel the path of the rope in your hands like a remembered prayer, not recited, only known. Then you step into place, and the square shifts its attention by the width of your shoulders. You give the keeper your morning nod, and he returns it with the same careful measure as yesterday. The gesture has no flourish. It is a tidy tool, like a well-fitted pin. He stands with one hip set against the beam, and one heel lodged in a shallow hollow of the stone apron that belongs only to him. The winch handle sits under his palm, as though it grew there. His turban has faded into a color that refuses to choose between brown and green, and the cloth has been wrapped so many mornings it now remembers the turns better than any hand could instruct it. He is not tall and not short. He is the exact height of the frame's crossbar when he straightens. His beard holds fine dust the way a shelf keeps flour, only as a reminder of work, never as a complaint. When he looks at you, it is always first with attention and only after with recognition, as if he checks the square itself, then the water, then the person, in that order. You approve of the sequence. It makes you feel as though the well has a mind that is careful with you. He moves without hurry. The handle obeys. The wheel grumbles. The rope leans into its track, and the bucket descends with a sigh that belongs to old wood remembering rain. The keeper listens more than he watches. You see it in the delicate tilt of his head, in the way his thumb rides the handle only lightly while his fingers do the pulling. He is counting by sound. Squeak, hum, splash, quiet, wait. The same music every morning. The same piece played on different air. The square accepts his rules, which are mostly just habits given the dignity of being repeated. He won't speak loudly if the rope is in motion. He will not let anyone tie a knot larger than a bean near the bucket's ring. And if a stranger's rope comes with show-off loops, he smooths them with 2 firm passes of his hand, as if ironing a sleeve. He will step aside for elders without turning it into theater. A child who does not let go when told will be given the wooden cup first, not as a reward, but as a lesson that the hand can drink only after it learns to release. At his feet sits a narrow basket with the tools of his patience, a scrap of leather for the axle, a pinch of lime powder wrapped in paper for sealing a fussing seam, a coil of thinner cord for temporary sins, and a pebble that looks like any other until you realize it is the one he prefers to wedge the wheel when wind tries to meddle. Every item carries its own shine, where fingers have asked the same service out of it 100 times. He speaks to the well the way some people speak to animals, low, competent, never sentimental. When the bucket strikes too hard, he clicks his tongue once, and the rope corrects its ambition. When the wheel drags, he rolls his wrist, and the axis remembers to be generous. When someone offers to help with the handle, he steps aside half a pace, without losing authority, letting their arms discover how much of the task belongs to timing rather than strength. A plain, well-known fact sits beside him like a second shadow. Lime keeps the water sweet. The inner stones are sealed with it. He inspects the white skin each season and rubs a new wash into seams that look thirsty. It is the sort of maintenance that never draws applause because it succeeds by nothing happening. The water stays as it should be, cool, clear, unremarkable in the right way. In towns and villages across the Maghrib in this century, Such lime work was as ordinary as sharpening a blade. A keeper who minded it could be trusted. He keeps a measuring stick too, just a length of reed with faint marks incised along one side. Now and then, between draws, he eases it down into the dark and waits for the faint kiss of water, then lifts it and judges the shine. No one needs to ask what the marks mean. They say, "Today is comfortable," or "Not yet worried," or "Time to speak with the mosque steward about mending the old cistern that sleeps under the southern lane." Historians still argue whether keepers in small rural wells of the 17th century commonly kept written tallies of depth and usage, or relied entirely on a memory trained by repetition and a few silent marks on a familiar stick. The truth likely walked on both feet. Where paper was near, notes were made. Where it was dear, the body remembered. You watch a trick he has shown the square for years. When the filled bucket clears the lip, he lets it hang and settle until the surface stops arguing. Then he touches the side with 2 fingers. The touch draws an obedient shiver from the water that frees clinging drops from the rim and saves a little for the jar below. He says nothing about this economy, but every keeper has some version of it, a private nudge that makes the morning last longer. A fringe habit clings to his frame like a rumor. A narrow strip of indigo cloth tied around the upright post, its end cut into a small fork. Some say he fastens it to remind himself which way the clean sea wind comes on certain days. Others say the split tongues drink bad looks meant for the water. He claims it keeps the post from splintering where the grain wants to open. Perhaps all 3 are true in their own way. The cloth flutters now and then, earning its keep by giving the eye something soft to land on while the bucket rises. He instructs without instruction. When the woman before you lifts her jar too soon, he simply lowers the bucket another finger's breadth, and the mistake corrects itself as water finds the jar's mouth. When a visiting man from the hills tries to drag his heavy skin across the rim, the keeper clears his throat so precisely, the man sets the skin down again, embarrassed and wiser. The square learns as much from the clearing of that throat as from any speech. You think briefly of how such men are named in other places: drawers, guardians, keepers, well fathers, and how the work is the same under different words. In some towns, the position belongs to an endowment, the income from a shop front paying for rope and leather, for a mason's day, for the keeper's family. In others, the job rotates within a kin group that keeps the square's memory tidy. The pattern shifts with hills and roads, but the task does not change. Water must go from below to above with dignity. He glances toward the sky as the wheel turns, a habit of 2 heartbeats, then returns to the rope. The sun is still low enough to draw a second, cooler version of his shadow along the stone. When he smiles at a remark from the back of the queue, the smile arrives mostly in his eyes, as if he stores the open part of it for the last cup he pours for himself once the early crowd is thinned. Now it is your turn to come forward, and he does the smallest thing that always pleases you. He shifts his heel out of his hollow and offers you that exact footing. It is not a ceremony. It is an understanding that the hollow will hold any good draw. Your toes find the place without looking. The stone feels slightly cooler inside the curve. You imagine it learned that trick by centuries of bare feet teaching it to keep a little night. He takes the loose end of your rope in a practiced hand, passes it over the wheel so it lies clean in the groove, then returns the end to you with his palm open. A small transfer of authority. You feel the weight of his attention settle on your hands, not heavy, not indulgent, only present. The bucket waits like a polite guest at the edge of a conversation. A mainstream truth recites itself in your bones. Let the first span run free, then check, then count. You lower the bucket steadily, your fingers paying rope into the dark, and the keeper's head tilts at the same angle as yours, listening for the exact, hollow answer that means the water has been found. He nods once. When the splash comes, there it is, and places his palm lightly at the back of your wrist to remind you that eagerness is a poor partner for depth. The rope hums. The well breathes. There is a small custom here that remains undecided in the square's memory. Some swear the keeper once had a reed whistle and would breathe a 3-note rhythm to teach new hands the pace of the draw. Others remember no such whistle and insist the rhythm lived only in his foot. Historians still argue whether such signals, clicks, claps, whistles, were common at rural wells or belonged to busy city courtyards where noise needed taming. You think you hear a rhythm even now, whether from reed or foot you cannot say. Perhaps the wheel itself sings the measure. He steps back half a pace and lets you own the final part of the descent. The rope pulls, weight gathers, and the handle begins to rise under his hand as if greeting an old story. You are inside the keeper's circle now, inside his patient geometry of wood, rope, stone, and water. If you listen closely, you can hear how everything fits by sound alone. You listen. It fits. The wheel speaks first, a long, low groan as the rope shifts under weight. It is not an unfriendly sound. It is the voice of old wood doing what it knows, its grain answering the pull in slow syllables. You grip the rope and feel it tighten, the fibers growing firmer as the bucket drinks below. The twist presses into your palms, not sharply, but enough to remind you that water does not rise without your skin lending some of itself. The rope slides with a steady rasp, and the wheel turns in a deliberate arc. Each rotation sends a small tremor through the frame, down the posts, and into the stone lip. Your feet, bare on the apron, receive it like the thrum of a drum felt through the floor. The weight grows first like a basket of dates, then like a loaf-heavy tray, and soon enough like the solid arm of a sleeping child. You set your stance, heel in the keeper's hollow, toes gripping slightly, shoulders ready for the lift to come. You draw with both arms now, one pulling, the other guiding. The rope warms quickly under your fingers, the dust from its surface mixing with the faint damp of deeper strands. You catch the scent of the well itself, a coolness edged with minerals, a breath that has passed through stone and shadow for longer than anyone remembers. It is the kind of air that makes you think of caves, of jars kept under stairs, of rain that fell before your own life began. A bucket's journey is mostly invisible until it nears the top. You listen for the signs, the softer groan of the wheel as the line shortens, the way the rope grows slightly lighter between pulls, the faint slosh that hints the water is testing its container. Then it comes into view, the wet curve breaking the darkness, droplets scattering like small coins back into the shaft. The sun catches on the rising water's surface, and for a moment, the bucket holds both the sky and the well's depths together. It is a plain truth that wooden pulleys like this one, paired with a simple counterweight or the careful balance of a skilled drawer, have been used in Moroccan wells for centuries. Their design changes little: a groove deep enough to cradle the rope, a wheel wide enough to keep it from biting too hard, and a post strong enough to take the strain. What changes is the hand each keeper and each drawer leaving their own polish on the wood, their own pace in the wheel's memory. A quieter, fringe detail floats in your mind. Some say the sound of the pulley can tell you the mood of the water. A deep, even hum means the water is settled. A sharp, skipping rhythm means the level is low or the walls are shifting their weight. Whether this is a truth born of experience or a superstition dressed in observation is unclear. Historians still argue whether such listening was a skill widely taught or only claimed by those who spent their lives beside a single well. The bucket reaches the lip, swinging slightly, its iron handle clinking against the rope ring. You ease it over the rim, mindful not to bruise the stone with too quick a motion. A thin stream runs off the bottom, tracing a silver line down the outer wall before vanishing into the dust below. The keeper's eyes flick to it, as they always do, not to scold but to measure. He knows how much water has stayed and how much has fled. You rest the bucket on the apron, letting it settle before lifting. The rope sags slightly now, relieved of its burden, but you hold it a moment longer, paying it out slowly so it coils neatly beside your foot. The fibers, warm from the pull, release a faint scent of tallow and plant fiber that clings to your hands. The water in the bucket is clear, holding a faint ripple from its journey upward. You can see the reflection of your own hands above it, the rope dust still in the lines of your skin. Somewhere in the depth of the reflection, the square's pale buildings bend and sway with the water's movement. You dip 2 fingers in, testing its chill. It is cold enough to draw the heat from your skin in an instant. The keeper, without speaking, gestures toward your jar. The next part belongs to stone, clay, and the brief arc of water in the morning sun. Your hands close around the rope once more, but now they lift with purpose instead of patience. The bucket, heavy and obedient, rests just inside the lip, its weight pressing down into your arms and shoulders. You lean back a fraction, not enough to strain, just enough to let the pull come from your whole body rather than your hands alone. The rope creaks against the bucket's ring, a sound as familiar as your own footsteps in the courtyard. You bring it upward in small, controlled breaths, a half lift, a pause, another half lift, until it clears the stone. The keeper shifts his stance to give you room, his heel leaving the hollow you shared. With a steady motion, you guide the bucket across the short space between the rim and your waiting jar. The jar stands on the apron, its wide mouth tilted slightly towards you, a folded cloth ring cushioning its base. The clay is cool to the touch, darker near the bottom, where dampness has already claimed it from past mornings. You balance the bucket with one hand on the iron handle and the other steadying the rope, letting the swing settle before committing to the pour. The water moves slowly at first, a thin thread slipping over the bucket's edge, striking the inner wall of the jar with a muffled glug. You adjust the angle, and the thread thickens into a soft, steady stream. Each gulp echoes faintly inside the clay, the sound dampened by the folded cloth stopper tucked into the jar's neck for later. A few stray drops escape, running cool over your knuckles before falling onto the stone. The sunlight catches the surface of the water mid-pour, making it briefly opaque, as though the jar is swallowing light along with the water. A faint mist rises where the stream meets the cooler air inside the vessel. You keep your hands steady, the rope brushing against your wrist, the bucket emptying without a hurry. It is a plain fact that by the 17th century, water jars in Morocco were often shaped with a slightly inward curving rim to make pouring easier and spillage less likely. The clay, left unglazed, allowed for slow evaporation, cooling the contents throughout the day. Such jars could keep water fresh even in the heat of summer, and their forms were so well suited to their task that their design changed little over centuries. One fringe detail you've heard, though rarely seen, is that some households used to scratch a single word or mark beneath the base of their jars not to be read, but to speak to the water, inviting it to stay clear. The marks might be a line, a circle, or a simple cross, pressed into the clay before firing. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread belief or merely a potter's quirk passed along to a few buyers who liked the idea. The jar before you receives the last of the bucket with a satisfying weighty sound, like cloth folding. You tilt the bucket upright, watching the final droplets gather at its edge before they release themselves to fall. The rope slides once against your palm as you set the bucket down, the fibers warm but no longer pulling. You reach for the folded cloth stopper, thick, woven cotton knotted loosely at the ends, and press it gently into the jar's mouth. It sits snugly, enough to keep out the dust and wandering insects, but loose enough that air can still pass. The jar will travel like this, balanced against your hip, its cool mass a quiet companion on the walk home. The keeper nods once, taking the rope from your hands to ready it for the next drawer. His fingers move quickly, smoothing the lay, checking for any twist before sending the bucket down again. The pulley answers him with the same well-worn voice it gave you. You lift the jar, feeling its pull settle into your arms and against your ribs. The stone apron is warm now beneath your feet, but the jar's coolness rises like a shadow against your side. Around you, the square continues its slow rotation of movement and sound. Another bucket meets the water below. Another voice greets a neighbor. Another jar finds its fill. Your own place in that pattern has been met for the day. Now the path home waits, with the jar's weight a steady reminder of the well's gift. You linger a moment with the jar resting against your calf and listen down into the throat of the well. The square carries many sounds, but the well returns them differently, pressed thin, sent upward through stone, cooled as if the air itself had been rinsed. A bucket is released, and you hear the rope's soft hiss running over the wheel. A heartbeat later, the distant splash arrives from below, rounded and patient, followed by a hollow ring that climbs the shaft like a slow bell. The echo touches the underside of the rim, brushes your fingers where they rest on stone, and dissolves into the morning. You lean a little closer and exhale. Your breath falls inward as if offered into a jar. For half a moment there is only the smell of lime and damp rock. Then the well sends your whisper back to you, thinner and more careful, as though it has weighed your words and kept only their outline. You do not speak again. It is enough to listen. The keeper lowers the next bucket with the same measured grace. You track its journey by sound alone, the mild scrape where the rope passes a familiar roughness in the groove, the almost silence of the long descent, then the soft collision of iron ring and water. The echo returns not as a true mirror, but as a portrait done in fewer strokes. Even the small patter of droplets falling back is translated into a gentle ticking that could be mistaken for a bird in a nearby fig if one were not standing here with both hands on stone. It is a plain, steady fact that wells were often lined in lime to keep water sweet and walls sound. The white skin of lime on the stones does more than seal. It also hardens into a surface that shapes the air, turning the shaft into a narrow instrument. Builders have long known this, whether or not they use the language of instruments. A well without lime will sound different, more dull, more easily swallowed by the rock. This is why keepers tend the lime, for sweetness in the mouth and honesty in the ear. A fringe practice floats in memory. When the dry season grows long, someone may drop a single grain of barley and count the heartbeats before its tiny plink answers from below, then count again to the echo's echo, to guess the depth and mood of the water. It is not exact. It does not need to be. The counting eases a worry by giving it something gentle to hold. Whether this habit belongs to your village in this century or to a cousin of memory from a nearby valley hardly matters to the comfort it brings. Historians still argue whether such listening games were truly used to measure depth or were only a way for idlers to pass the hour at the rim, making music of need. You notice how different voices fare with the well. The soft talk of women in line folds downward and returns tidy, like cloth laid in a chest. The sharp bark of a vendor calling to a late customer arrives back clipped and humbled. A child's giggle skips along the inner stones and returns as a small, bright chime that makes even the keeper's mouth inch toward a smile. The well does not scold. It edits. You accept its taste in sound as you accept its taste in water. You trail a damp finger around the stone lip, and your touch draws a faint circle in the dust, a ring that almost looks like a diagram of the echo's path, though you know the path is more complicated. The sun warms the rim enough now that the dampness dries as you complete the circle. For a moment, you consider tapping the rim with a knuckle to hear if different stones answer in different notes. You decide against it. The square has its music. You will not ask it to play louder. A small story from your grandmother arrives the way memories do at the well, without knocking. She said that once, as a girl, she sang a single line of a harvest song into this shaft, and the well returned the line with one note missing. Always the same note. She claimed that missing note foretold a broken tooth on a borrowed comb later that week. You suspect a child's neat rearrangement of events, but you keep the story because it fits so perfectly into the well's habit of giving back most, not all, of what it receives. Historians still argue whether villagers often attach such omens to their wells, or whether travelers, hungry for quaintness, collected more tales than truth. The stones remain indifferent to the debate. They answer only to water and breath. Beside you, the next drawer, a man with a goatskin water bag eases his weight against the rim. The skin creaks as it empties the last of yesterday's measure into a trough for a waiting animal, whose tongue slaps water with loud competence. When the keeper's bucket rises again, the goat flicks an ear and looks toward the sound as if it, too, is learning the well's grammar. You smile at the animal's odd attention and imagine the echo entering its long, dark pupil and curling there like a small fish. A mainstream observation settles strongly in your mind. Crisscrossing this land is a quiet network of water wells, like this one. Roof, runoff cisterns, sleeping under courtyards, shallow channels that guide spring overflow toward garden plots. People name these things as they name kin. They talk about them as if they possess temperament. A cistern sulks when neglected. A well grows jealous if another is dug too near. These are not truths of stone, but habits of the mouth that make care easier to remember. The care itself is true, even if the adjectives are borrowed from people. You shift your jar and listen to one more draw. The keeper, perhaps aware of your attention, allows the wheel to coast a finger's width longer than strictly necessary. The bucket mouth clips the inner stone once. Gently a small knock, and the shaft sends back 3 declining echoes like small bowls nested inside one another. The oldest man in the line hears it and nods as if the well has used a word he favors. From the market edge, a cart rumbles. The sound arrives at the well as a soft tremor, travels down the wall, touches the water, and returns as something between a sigh and a burp that makes the children snicker. Someone coughs, and the cough, chased and smoothed by the shaft, returns as a polite ahem that sounds like a teacher's warning as remembered by a fool. It is difficult not to think of the well as a character when it has such a talent for commentary. You remind yourself it is only air and stone. Then you allow yourself the kinder thought that air and stone are company enough. Your palm, placed flat now on the rim, cools pleasantly. A thin trickle from an earlier pour has mapped a new path toward the apron's edge. You watch the wet line fade into matte stone. At your feet, a small puddle gathers where the apron dips. A bee lands and drinks from the shine, then lifts again, satisfied. Even the bee receives the well's simple editing. It arrives brash, leaves calm. The sun has climbed. Shadows draw closer to their owners. You roll your shoulders and accept that listening is also a form of work. The jar will not carry itself, and the courtyard will want its cool portion before the day grows direct. You let your last breath fall into the well, not a word, only breath, and then feel it return, a quiet tap against your face, as if the shaft and the air and the lime have all agreed you may go. Before stepping back, you rest 2 fingers on the stone and give the rim a thankful tap. It is not a prayer and not a superstition. It is the same courtesy you give a door that has behaved, or a cup that has not cracked. The well, true to form, swallows the tiny sound and returns a version so small only you hear it. You lift the jar to your hip. The echo retreats behind you as the square's larger noises return to their usual shapes. You have taken your part of the well's morning, and the well has taken its small, polite part of yours. That balance pleases you. You turn toward the alley, feeling the jar's cool weight settle into your hold, and begin the walk home. You are 2 steps into the lane when a familiar voice asks, very softly, if you might lend a moment to the rope. You turn back without making a ceremony of it. The jar rests against your hip like a tame animal. You set it down near the shaded side of the apron, tucking the folded cloth under its base so the clay won't whisper against stone. The keeper reads your small change of plan at once. He shifts a palm on the handle and lets the bucket ride low again, patient as a held breath. The woman beside him, older, with a scarf tucked tight at the nape, smiles with her eyes the way people do when their hands are full of other tasks. You take her rope, which is serviceable but a little stiff, and let it pass through your fingers like a slow river learning your palm. You square your stance in the keeper's hollow, the left foot finding that coolness you like, and the right set a little behind for sense. The rope remembers how to speak to you. Dust from its outer hairs settles on your skin, and the deeper strands, touched by past damp, feel cooler, heavier, more obedient. You give the first gentle pull, not really a pull, more an introduction. Then another, real this time. The wheel answers with its good-natured groan. The frame gives back the smallest shiver that runs through your heels and into the earth. You draw hand over hand, slow enough that each palm can make a decision before it leaves the rope. Your wrists learn the rope's small wishes. Your elbows learn when to open and close. Your shoulders do the quiet, sensible work that never asks to be praised. The keeper's reed whistle does not exist, or perhaps it did once for someone else, but there is still a rhythm here. Pull, breathe, catch. Pull, breathe, catch. The bucket begins its upward speech, a low slosh that becomes a polite clink as the iron ring tests the rope's loop. The weight grows in clean, honest steps. You know them well enough to name them for yourself. The lightness of empty promise, the agreeable tug of the first mouthful, the steadier insistence of a half jar, the brief impatience of almost full, when the rope begs you to hurry and you refuse. You keep your pace like a baker who refuses to open the oven too soon. The well respects this kind of stubbornness. A plain, steady fact keeps you company. Across the Maghrib in this century, water comes up by many cousins of the same idea hand. Roped wells like this, counterweighted winches, animal-drawn water wheels that sing to themselves in fields. In larger gardens and estates, Asakia's clay pots parade in an endless loop, lifted by a beast that knows the circle better than the path home. Here, in the village square, rope and hands are the whole story. and the story is perfectly sufficient. A fringe trick your uncle taught you rides your fingers now. Before the draw, dust the palms lightly with a pinch of clean sand from the apron's dry edge. The sand gives the rope a better opinion of your skin, and your skin a better opinion of the rope. Some say ashes do the job as well. Others say ashes insult the water. Opinions walk in pairs at the well. You keep to sand for peace. Whether these little grits truly change the draw or only change the drawer's mind is a matter for philosophers with soft hands. Historians still argue whether such palm dusting was common practice or just one of those household habits that survives because it makes sense to the person who believes in it. The bucket breaks the surface far below you hear it. Then smell it, that neat, mineral cool that could convince a stubborn noon to be gentle. Your fingers ease for a heartbeat, then pull again. The wheel's groove is honest. It guides rather than bites. A slip would be forgiven by the keeper's hand before it became a mistake, but you are not planning to give him the chance. You settle the rope into the perfect lie for the last arm's length, and a moment later the bucket's dark curve rises out of the well's mouth, bright with dripping. You let it hang and settle, as you were taught. The surface inside stills, and the sun lays a coin of light there that bends when the bucket sways. You swing it just enough to bring the mouth to the older woman's jar. She holds the jar's neck with her left hand and lowers her eyes the way one does when listening for a delicate answer. Your grip shifts. One hand on the iron, the other reading the rope's new mood. The pour begins thin thread, then bright ribbon, then the proper steady glug that pats the inner wall of clay and says all is in order. A plain detail about jars rises while you work. Unglazed clay drinks its share as it should, giving back coolness through its skin all afternoon. By sundown, a thin, damp bloom will appear where the jar rests against the mat, a halo that leaves its signature on the reed. Travelers notice this and think of miracles. Households notice it and think of supper. You keep the stream true, and the jar answers with its slow, hollow swallow. The older woman nods once when the weight in her hands changes from hopeful to satisfied. "Enough," she says in the smallest voice that still deserves the name of speech. You respect enough. You tilt the bucket upright, let 3 stubborn drops choose their fate, then ease it back toward the rim. The keeper takes the rope for the next descent, with the same calm he uses to accept a coin or a question. She thanks you with a word and a look. You answer with the same. She will not hurry lifting the jar. She will let the cool declare itself first, then take the weight, then adjust it to the hip with a small summary grunt that is not complaint but punctuation. You recognize that punctuation in your own day often enough. The square's air moves very slightly. It smells of lime and stone and, now, the faint green of crushed leaves from a vendor trimming mint nearby. Somewhere a ladle hits a basin with a practical clack. A child's reed cup drinks a small, showy gulp just because it can. The well's echo returns these proofs as thinner copies, respectful and brief. You like that? You glance at the pulley, listening as you have listened since you were small. There is a little uncertainty you carry, a private one you never bother to solve. Does the wheel's voice actually change with the season? Or do your ears simply hear a different mood because your shoulders have a different workload? In planting time, the groan seems lower. In fig season, sharper. After the first winter rain, almost cheerful. Historians still argue whether well pulleys were carefully tuned by makers, or whether any tuning is only the mind's habit of fitting sound to work. The keeper would tell you the wheel speaks clearly when it needs oil and otherwise makes music for its own amusement. You find his answer sufficient. You set the woman's rope coil in a tidy ring at her feet so it will not wander, then return to your own jar. The clay is cool through the shawl when you test it with your hip. You lift thigh, hip, arm, chin, the practice sequence that makes the weight behave as if it were smaller than truth. The stopper in the mouth sits firm. A film of damp has already gathered around it like a soft crown. Before you go, you give the apron a quick, thoughtless kindness. With the side of your foot, you push a small bead of spilled water toward a shallow crack, where it will hide from the sun a few minutes longer. This will not change the day. It pleases you anyway. Many good habits are of exactly this size. You nod to the keeper. who has already forgotten your help in the proper way, not because it was nothing, but because such favors are part of the well's grammar and need no record. He has the next rope in hand. The wheel speaks its first clear word of the new draw. The woman moves off with her jar, steps careful and sure. You take your place in the lane again, the jar's weight returning to your side like a companion who went nowhere, only waited. The square resumes behind you, wood, water, rope, and you carry forward the sound of that rhythm as if it had been poured into your ears along with the morning's measure. You pause at the edge of the square just long enough to witness the moment that never quite repeats itself. Another drawer has taken your place at the rim, a young man with broad palms and a quick, careful way of breathing, and the bucket he rides from darkness begins to rise. You watch for the instant when water first declares itself to the sun. It happens quietly, as most true things do. A dark curve lifts out of the well's mouth, and along its lip a thin, bright thread spills backward, a shining stitch unsewing itself into the throat below. The sound is a light, descending chatter, thread on stone, silver undoing itself in air. The bucket sways and corrects, small arcs of light breaking from its edge like the tails of tiny comets. The rope hums. The wheel answers with its familiar low word. A breeze finds the falling thread and frays it into brief pearls before gravity gathers them again and drops them like beads. The square seems to hold its breath for that one heartbeat in which the bucket remembers both worlds at once, the cool, invisible pressure below and the bright, insisting warmth above. You could leave now, jar settled and task complete, but you stay a few breaths longer because this small spill reminds you of every morning when you were younger and thought the backward stream was a mistake to be corrected. It is not. It is the bucket's way of writing down its journey as it crosses the threshold. If no water falls back, the keeper frowns. Either the rope has been pulled too hard or the bucket has learned a stubborn balance that insults the rim. A good draw allows a little forgetting, a measured offering to the dark that held it safe. The young man eases the handle over the lip and holds steady. The backward stream thins, threads itself into a single clear line, and then a final drop gathers with slow dignity and releases itself, a small transparent seed returning to its first promise. The keeper nods, satisfied, and shifts his weight as the pour begins. Your hands, empty now, echo the angle in memory. Your wrist remembers the rope's talk. Your palm remembers the bucket's iron ring. A plain fact walks into the square without needing to knock. Many wells in this century keep a notch or a shallow spill cut on the inside of the stone rim so that the returning thread finds a polite path home. It is less visible from where you stand, a modest detail reachable only by the bucket's mouth and the keeper's fingertips. The groove saves the stone from being chewed by years of small streams and guides the water so it does not wet the rope more than necessary. Carvers know this. Keepers ask for it. Drawers appreciate it only after they have worked a season. A quieter, fringe tidbit accompanies the sight, one you heard from a traveling mason who liked to tell his trade secrets as if they were parables. He claimed some keepers rubbed the inner lip with the faintest breath of oil from olive pits during dry weeks, so the returning thread would break into gentler drops and not wear a harsh tooth in the stone. Whether the oil truly softened water's bite or only pleased the eye when the droplets rounded themselves is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether such small ministrations were practiced widely or are simply one workman's pride retold until it sounds like common habit. You step to the side so another neighbor can pass, your jar balanced against your hip. The square's sounds rearrange themselves around this new draw. The soft glug into clay, a single cough turned polite by the shaft, the rustle of a scarf, the whisper of sandals sliding instead of lifting. Dust hangs in the sun like quiet smoke. A bee changes its mind mid-flight and becomes a brief crooked letter between your eyes and the wood of the frame. The backward thread has its own weather. In cool mornings like this, it looks heavy, almost metallic, as if the air held it in a loose spoon. On hotter days, it frays before your eyes, breaking into dew that never finds a leaf. Once, near noon, you saw the thread catch full light and turn into a short-lived ribbon that showed the entire square in a wobbled, upside-down copy. You laughed aloud at that, in spite of yourself, and the keeper pretended not to hear. because laughter is not forbidden, but the well prefers modesty. The rim itself is crowded with history, not visible as names. Here, a shallow bruise in the stone where someone years ago struck an iron ring too hard in a hurry. There, a pale halo where lime has been renewed more often because the backward stream loves that spot more than the others. These marks are a kind of reading you cannot do with letters. You run a finger along the cool outer face of the stone, away from the wet, and feel the grit that never leaves entirely the quarry's memory. The mason's tool, the dust of 100 markets, the nighttime breath of the square when no one is watching it rest. The young man tilts the bucket for his own jar. The stream thickens and speaks the jar's inward curve. Your attention returns to the lip, which is already dried where the thread passed a moment before. The pattern repeats with the next draw, a spill, a glitter, a single returning bead, yet no two are the same. The backward water is not waste, it is punctuation. It says, here is the line between below and above, and the sentence is not finished until a little of below is allowed to remain below. You shift your jar to the other hip, testing the balance you will keep for the walk home. The stopper settles with a soft thud. The cloth ring under the base gives just a little, and then holds. The cool rising through the clay talks to your ribs, and your skin answers by relaxing the way it always does when a burden admits it will behave. A mainstream observation rises with your breath. In the Maghrib's towns and villages, well design is practical. First shaft, lining, lip, frame, wheel, but it is also conversational. A good well teaches hands to listen, leave a span, then check, pause so the thread can write, pour as if the jar were speaking back. Travelers have called such wells hospitable when they meant the people were kind. Sometimes they meant the well itself showed manners. You like the confusion. Manners and water both move easier when acknowledged. Your eyes stray to the keeper's basket of small tools. The leather scrap waits for the axle. The reed stick waits for depth. The lime wrapped in paper waits for a day that asks for mending. You think of the days when the backward thread is longer because the level is shy, and of others when the bucket rises almost gleefully and forgets to spill a drop. You wonder, not for the first time, whether the well's taste for punctuation changes with season or with mood. Historians still argue whether fluctuations in such shallow signs, thread length, echo brightness, the wheel's note truly correspond to measurable depth, or whether these are only the square's stories dressing themselves in useful clothes. A stray rooster calls as if late to his duties. The call bounces, softened, off the surrounding walls. A vendor shakes a cloth and steals the sun from your eyes for a blink. When the cloth falls, your vision fills again with stone, rope, and the persistent little stream that always remembers to go back. In that blink, you decide that watching the surface break is worth one more heartbeat any time it is offered. The young man finishes his pour. The keeper flips the bucket's mouth toward the rim in a gesture. So practiced it lands exactly where drying is quickest. The last drop lingers, thick with indecision, then falls, and the well makes its tiny sound of acceptance. You take this as your own cue. There is a courtyard waiting for the sound of water meeting basin, for the scent of damp clay waking herbs, for the small ceremony of placing the jar in the one corner of shade that pretends to be cool even after midday. You lift, the jar settles into its traveling shape against your hip. Your forearm presses the neck gently, and the stopper breathes a little as air shifts under it. The rope, coiled now, brushes your calf like a cat and remembers it will have work again tomorrow. You turn your back to the well and begin the homeward steps, leaving behind the soft grammar of wood and water and taking with you the certainty that a thin, backward stream will be writing itself into the morning long after you set your jar down. You step out of the square, letting the sound of the pulley fade behind you. The lane ahead is narrower here, the walls close enough that the air between them feels cooler, shaded not only by height, but by the angle of the morning sun. Your jar rides steady against your hip, its base cushioned by the folded cloth, its weight leaning into your ribs like a well-behaved companion. Each step makes a soft, hollow note through the clay, a rhythm you fall into without thought. The dust is finer here, and your sandals disturb it in thin puffs that drift only a little before settling again. From one wall, the faint scent of figs reaches you, not fresh, but dried. the sweetness muted and warm, perhaps from a basket resting just inside a doorway. A shadow moves there, then stills. You know better than to stare. People tend their mornings in quiet, and a glance too long can be mistaken for curiosity. You pass the edge of a low courtyard gate, its wooden planks bound by strips of metal gone soft at the edges. A small pot of rosemary sits on the step, the plant just brushing the reach of the light. The smell catches briefly as you move past, mixing with the faint mineral scent still rising from your jar. The two scents together are sharper than either alone, a reminder of the way water wakes plants, and plants in turn wake the air. It is a steady truth that in 17th century Moroccan lanes, shade is as valuable as water once the sun begins its climb. Builders learned long ago to turn streets toward one another like cupped hands, offering shadow at different hours. Even here, in the cooler season, you notice how the shaded parts breathe differently, slower, less urgent, carrying the weight of night a little longer. You slow your steps to match the cool, but your mind drifts to a fringe saying you once overheard, that if you walk too quickly with a full jar, the water will remember and try to leave you sooner. Whether this is a lesson about balance or a superstition about water's temper, you couldn't say. Historians still argue whether such sayings belong to practical advice, avoid spilling, or to a wider belief that water prefers those who move with respect. You choose to believe both. A narrow window high in the wall spills a line of sunlight that cuts across your path. The jar passes through it, and for a moment the clay glows softly, as if the water inside were a lamp. The effect vanishes as you step back into shade, but you carry the image with you, a small and private reward for the slow walk home. The rope, coiled now and tied at your side, shifts with each step, brushing lightly against your thigh. It carries its own faint scent, dry plant and old work, and though it will not be needed again today, you keep it close. The jar feels heavier now that you have walked a while, but not unkindly so. It is the kind of weight that speaks of purpose. The lane turns ahead, and you know the olive grove waits just beyond. Its shade will be thicker, the light softer, and you will pause there not to rest exactly, but to let the cool of leaves speak to the cool of water before you take the last stretch to your courtyard. The first steps beneath the olive trees are softer, as if the earth here has been persuaded to remember its own gentleness. The ground holds a mix of pale dust and fallen leaves, crushed thin over months until they resemble curled paper. Your sandals make less noise, and the jar at your hip approves of the change, settling more easily against you. Sunlight comes through in loose patches, turning the air into a shifting cloth of gold and shadow. The trees themselves are older than most roofs you pass each day. Their trunks twist like long, slow questions, bark peeling in thin curls that reveal smooth gray beneath. The smell here is neither the green sharpness of fresh leaves nor the sweetness of fruit, but something steadier, oil still hidden, years away from being pressed, waiting inside the wood like a quiet decision. You walk between the trunks without haste. The jar is cool, your hip is warm. The balance between the two feels like the narrow shade line you crossed earlier. On a good day, the walk through the grove is not just a shortcut, but a reminder that water and trees share a certain kind of patience. You give them both the same pace. A plain fact, spoken without ceremony. In 17th century Morocco, olive groves often bordered the paths between wells and houses. Trees gave shade to carriers and steadied the soil, and in turn the wells offered water for young saplings in dry seasons. The relationship was practical first, poetic later. Poets and travelers, of course, preferred the latter. They wrote about the silver of leaves and the echo of steps under them, leaving out the part where someone with a jar on their hip was grateful simply for the cooler air. One fringe story you once heard from an old keeper, not of a well, but of a grove, claimed that certain trees had favorite carriers. He swore the branches would lean toward those whose jars never spilled, offering them a thicker patch of shade. Whether this was a joke in the shape of a compliment or a genuine belief, you never decided. Historians still argue whether such favoritism stories grew from observation of the trees lean toward morning or evening light, or from the human habit of finding friendship where there is only wind. Your path curves slightly, and you duck under a low branch. Its leaves brush your head, scattering a faint dust that smells faintly of summer, even in this cooler season. The jar presses in as you lean, its weight briefly shifting before finding its place again. You give it a small pat through the cloth at its neck, the way you might reassure a child that the turn was part of the plan. A bird moves somewhere to your left, wings slicing the air twice before silence returns. The sound feels large here, magnified by the quiet of the grove. Your own steps feel smaller by comparison, their rhythm absorbed by the soft earth. The air ahead holds a pale brightness where the grove ends, and you know that beyond it, the path will grow louder underfoot and the heat will begin to test you. For now, you keep to the shade. The trees give no sign of hurry, and you match them, carrying water at the speed of leaves turning to face the day. The grove thins as you near its far edge, each tree now standing with more space between its roots. Sunlight starts to spill in long strokes across the ground, and the cool dimness you've been walking through loosens its hold. Your jar grows heavier in your sense of it, not because its weight has changed, but because the shade has stopped helping as much. The clay still breathes coolness into your side, yet you can feel the air warming around it, a slow tide rising against its chill. The trunks here are younger, smoother, less twisted than the elders deeper in the grove. Their bark holds more green and less gray, and the leaves above them are quicker to shift in the wind, flashing silver white with each movement. You step through these younger shadows carefully, the sun on your head now steady enough to remind you why this path is kinder earlier in the morning. Your sandals meet the edge of a patch of stone, worn flat in the center where many feet have passed. On either side, the stones keep their sharper edges, but the middle is smoothed to a shallow shine. A plain fact. Such patches are deliberate here. Villagers laid them where earth turns to mud in the rains, or where carts pass so often the ground would otherwise sink. They are not as wide as streets, only enough for a careful pair of feet or a single wheel. Over time, they take on the gloss of use, a kind of quiet record-keeping, a fringe habit, less certain. Some say carriers step onto these stones with the foot opposite to the hip carrying the jar, claiming it keeps the body's weight better balanced. Others dismiss this as nonsense, noting that people simply step however the path offers itself. Historians still argue whether these small pieces of walking advice began as real technique or simply as neighborly chatter made authoritative by repetition. You follow the habit today without deciding which side is correct. Your right foot finds the first stone as your jar rests on the left. The path here opens just enough for the breeze to pass through without the filtering of leaves. It comes warm, brushing the nape of your neck, lifting the edge of your shawl. The rope at your side shifts slightly in the movement, making a faint rasp as it turns against itself. You lower your elbow to quiet it, the way you would still a child's restless fidget. A donkey's bray drifts from beyond the grove, closer than before, followed by the dull thud of hooves against packed earth. You picture the animal carrying its own load, perhaps water, perhaps something else, and imagine its pace. Steady, not hurried, much like your own. You pass the final tree, its roots bulging from the earth, as if reluctant to let go of the shade it provides. Ahead lies open ground, sunlit and bright, with the low wall you know well marking the next turn toward home. Your hip adjusts once more to the jar's weight, and your breath deepens in preparation for the warmth to come. The grove has done its part. Now the sun will take over the conversation. You allow yourself a pause beneath the broadest crown in the grove. The leaves here gather light the way thin silver coins gather in a shallow bowl, flipping and glinting with each small breeze. You choose the spot where the trunk splits into two twisting columns, a natural backrest polished by other shoulders before yours. The ground is a patient cushion of dust, leaf crumbs, and olive pits that never found their way to a press. You lower the jar carefully, easing its base onto the folded cloth ring so clay will meet earth with courtesy. The weight leaves your hip in a long, forgiving exhale that seems to exit through your fingertips. You sit without collapsing. The body still speaks to the jar, even when the jar is no longer speaking to the body. Your palm rests lightly on the neck. Your forearm guards the stopper with a practiced curve. The clay is cool enough to make your wrist believe in shade again. The water inside answers with a silence so complete you could imagine it sleeping. You tip your head back and let the canopy replace the sky small, narrow ovals of brightness stitched into a loose weave of gray-green. The tree hums, not with sound you can name, but with the slow life of sap moving inside wood that refuses to hurry. A fly changes its mind above your knee. A beetle discovers that your sandal means nothing and goes around it. From deeper in the grove, a low conversation drifts, made of two patient voices trading bread, gossip, and weather wishes. The breeze braids the words until they are only shapes. You accept the shapes as enough. A plain, steady fact settles beside you like another traveler. By the 17th century, the olive was not merely a tree here, but a structure of life. Oil pressed in village beams, lamp, light fed from clay wicks, bread dipped where salt was cheap, salves rubbed into rope and hands, a year's luck counted in amphorae. Groves like this often sat under charitable endowments, waqf, or family trusts, their income assigned to mosques, fountains, or schools, so a place would be held together even when a season grew lean. The knowledge is simple and practical. It moves with cartwheels and ledger lines as easily as with prayers. A smaller fringe habit lives at the edge of the shade. Some carriers set a fresh olive leaf across a jar's mouth during rests, claiming it distracts flies and jealous glances alike. The leaf takes the attention, they say, and the water keeps its calm. You pull a leaf from where it already lay on the dust and lay it lightly across the stopper, not because you believe or disbelieve, but because the leaf is spare and the gesture is kind. Historians still argue whether such leaf placing belonged to your century in truth or slipped backward from later tellings, gathered like a stray bead by storytellers who prefer their mornings with small charms. You stretch your fingers and read the day in your hands. Rope dust lives in the lines like faint writing. A tiny blister threatens a corner you have known before. The skin over your collarbone remembers the coil. You pinch a crumb of clean earth and roll it in your palm, the same quiet grit you used for grip, then brush it away and watch the last of it decide which wrinkle to claim. The jar shines faintly where a film of damp has drawn a pale, cool circle near its base. Evaporation is a book the clay writes to the air. The air reads quickly and asks for more. Across the path, the light breaks open and runs through the leaves in bright ladders. A bird lands 2 arm lengths above your head, tilts its eye at you as if you owe it news, then decides you have brought only water and resumes its busy indifference. The shade moves a finger's width, and your back reads the change through the tree. Such slow arithmetic pleases you. The body prefers numbers it can feel. You think of the press by the lane and picture oil ribboning from stone into a jar, while water waits in your courtyard for tea. Washing, quieting dust. Uses divide like roots but nourish the same trunk. You resist the impulse to uncork and sip, not because thirst is absent, but because you promise the jar that the first taste belongs to home. Promises perform better when they are bored. You let the wish pass. There is a little uncertainty you keep, private and unmended. Whether these exact groves stood as dense in your grandparents' day, or whether the rows have wandered in and out with wars and harvests, adding and subtracting like tide lines no one charted. Travelers who wrote chose the grand groves, stewards who counted preferred numbers to branches. Neighbors remembered shade by summers rather than by decades. Historians still argue which endowments manage trees here in your century, and which belong to neat stories penned later. You accept not knowing. The leaves above you are proof enough of the present arrangement. You roll your shoulders, then lean forward and lift the jar 2 finger breaths, testing whether the ground will grant you a second rest without sulking. It does. You shift the folded cloth ring so it sits under a less abraded patch of clay. Kindness to things that serve is a good superstition, even if it is only courtesy. The leaf on the stopper trembles and then settles again, undecided whether it wants to be believed in. From the far field, a donkey gives a single, thoughtful bray, not complaint, not song, just a punctuation mark. The sound arrives through trees with its edges softened, then fades into the small, dry clicks of olives, touching olives in a light wind. Over your left shoulder, an ant drags a seed hull 3 times its size and proves, once again, that effort need not be theatrical to be convincing. You rise in 2 motions instead of 1. First, your back claims itself. Then, your legs reclaim the weight. The jar comes with you as if woken gently, the water inside offering only the smallest tap against its wall to say it noticed. The shade has slipped. Your pause has been long enough to make the day kinder, and short enough not to ask the jar to learn a new balance. You lift the cloth ring with your toe, set it true beneath the base, and settle the neck into your forearm's curve where the skin expects it. Before you step away, you look up through the leaves. The little windows of brightness have changed places while you rested, and in one of them a hawk passes like a quiet thought, cutting the light into two patient halves. You take that image the way you take the jar steady, without hurry, and turn toward the lane beyond the last trunk, where rosemary and warm wall and the bend toward your courtyard are waiting to finish the morning's sentence. The tree gives you a last cool breath as you leave. You give the tree nothing more than the shape of your shadow and a promise that you will walk like someone who has been granted shade. Both gifts are light and easily carried. The lane straightens into its longest, brightest stretch before home. Here, nothing stands between you and the sun except the thin veil of morning haze that still lingers near the rooftops. The air wavers slightly above the pale earth, a reminder that even at this early hour, heat is already laying its groundwork. The jar rests against your hip with the composure of something that has been here before, which, of course, it has many times, under many hands. Your sandals make a soft crunch on the packed path, each step producing a rhythm you could follow without thought. A plain fact keeps pace beside you. In your century, water carriers often developed a distinctive gait, not quite a shuffle, not quite a march tuned to the slosh and sway of the vessels they carried. Too much lift in the step, and the water surged upward. Too much drag, and the shoulders took more than their share of the strain. The body learned its own mathematics over months, each jar carried adding to the sum. Halfway down this stretch, a shadow flits across your path, the brief, curved silhouette of a swallow passing overhead. Its wings cut through the warm air without disturbing it, and it is gone before you have time to look up. The jar remains steady, its contents answering the swallow's speed with stillness. You notice a strip of slightly darker earth running along the left edge of the lane, where water has spilled in the past and darkened the dust. A fringe notion comes to you from an old neighbor. She claimed you could tell how careful a carrier was by where these darker marks appeared. Too far toward the center, and they were from hurried hands. Along the edge, they came from generous ones who offered a sip to plants or animals along the way. Whether that judgment was fair or merely habit, historians still argue. Some say such reading of the lane was a harmless pastime. Others that it was a quiet form of gossip dressed as observation. The lane passes a small cluster of stones laid deliberately to one side, forming a low platform. You have seen jars placed there to rest, while their carriers pause for conversation. Today, it stands empty, the surface warm from the sun and speckled with the shadows of passing insects. You do not stop. The jar's weight feels companionable rather than urgent, and the air ahead smells faintly of the courtyard you are heading toward. The sound of your steps changes as you pass over a thin scatter of gravel, sharper, more brittle, then returns to the softer thud of dust. A thin line of ants crosses here, undisturbed by your shadow, their path as fixed as yours. The rooftops ahead begin to rise higher in your view. Their edges are uneven, each built at a slightly different height, patched and extended over time. Between them, narrow slits of sky show deeper blue. The sun's angle sharpens, throwing small, bright shapes onto the walls that flank the final approach to your home. You lift the jar a fraction, settling it anew against your hip for the last few turns. The water inside gives a single, quiet shift, like a breath taken but not released. You match its steadiness, letting the rhythm of your steps carry you toward the waiting doorway. The doorway greets you with a square of shade that feels like water before you have even tasted any. You step through it as if the sun were a curtain you could set aside, and at once the courtyard's cooler breath rises to meet your face. Tiles wait in their familiar pattern, darker near the basin, paler where feet have rubbed them thinner over years. The jar rests against your hip in one last patient lean, and then lowers, with care, onto the folded ring of cloth beside the basin. The base finds its place as if the clay remembers this exact square of earth. You do not drink at once. Habit has taught your body that the first thing to do is to let your hands cool. You draw a palmful of water from the jar with a small cup and spill it across your fingers, then your wrists. The shock is small and pleasant, a map of chill tracing the blue rivers beneath your skin. You repeat the wash along the back of your neck and feel the weight you carried turn into something like gratitude. The jar, unglazed and breathing, answers with its invisible work, a thin, constant cool that it earns by giving up the smallest portion of its own measure to the air. The cup waits, leaning against the basin's rim. It is reed-wrapped pottery, light in the hand, its lip chipped and made harmless by time. You dip it once, not deeply, tilting the jar's mouth with a guiding finger so the stream will find the cup without argument. The first mouthful is a ceremony you keep for yourself. You do not tilt your head back or gulp. You rest the cup against your lower lip and let a single thread slip onto your tongue and meet the root of your mouth. Cool is a flavor here, slate and lime, and a faint sweetness borrowed from the clay. A plain, steady fact accompanies the swallow. Across the Maghrib in your century, porous earthen vessels are prized for this exact reason. Their walls drink a little and exhale a little, trading invisibly with the air to lower the water's heat. A jar set in a shaded corner keeps a more generous cool than one left in sun, and the circle of damp that gathers where it stands is not waste but proof of the bargain. Potter's shape for this: wide belly, steady foot, mouth that accepts both cup and ladle. The design changes little because it does not need to. You tilt the cup again. The second mouthful is wider, allowed to travel. It moves down with the measured relief of a door opening from a cool room to a cooler one. You feel the line it draws along your throat, as if someone were sketching you from the inside with a wet brush. It is clean, free of the smoke and spice that will belong to later hours. It is only water, perfectly itself, and in this moment that seems like an achievement. You pause before the third drink and notice the thin, evaporative bloom already forming around the jar's base, a paler ring spreading through the reed mat like the opening of a quiet flower. The air here smells of tile dust, mint memories from last night's cups, and the faint green of the courtyard pots that have not yet been watered today. A fly inspects the basin, rejects it, and continues to a more interesting corner. A fringe habit arrives with the cup, half remembered from an aunt who enjoyed giving advice the way others enjoy giving sweets. "Let one drop fall to the threshold before you drink your fill," she said. "The house will be less thirsty for complaints if the door has had its sip." You lift the cup and, with a small, almost invisible tilt, allow a single bead to slip from your finger onto the stone just inside the wooden sill. The bead flashes once and is gone. Whether the house notices, you cannot say. You like the idea that everything is offered one polite first taste. Historians still argue whether such threshold drops belong to older household rites or are later dressings placed on memory by people who prefer their mornings with a little ceremony. You take the third mouthful and feel your jaw soften, your shoulders follow, your breath agree to lengthen. The cup's rim is familiar to the curve of your lower lip. You have learned to set it just so to keep the chip from tickling your skin. You rest the cup on the basin ledge and listen. The house has its own small sounds when water comes home: wood forgetting its night tightness, clay remembering its work, a pigeon discovering the shade it prefers at this hour. You kneel on one knee and tip a ladle for the herb pots. The mint receives its portion with a pleased hush, darkening as the thin streams reach the roots. The rosemary behind it drinks with less ceremony, letting the water run quickly through and out, as if hurrying to find the deeper, cooler layer. You give the basil a short rein and save a few cupfuls for the far pot, where a stubborn fig cutting is pretending to have no opinion about life. The watered earth answers with the scent it stores for such moments, a soft, dark exhale that belongs to courtyards in every season. A question you have never entirely settled drifts back while you pour. Did households in your grandparents' day lay a sprig of some bitter herb wormwood, perhaps across the jar's mouth to quiet insects and sharpen the taste? You have heard the practice praised and dismissed in equal parts. Some insist it makes the water restless and perfumed. Others swear it keeps the jar honest in damp weather. Historians still argue whether such flavoring was common or whether later tongues flavored the tale instead, borrowing from city habits and pushing them backward into village years. You do not trouble the jar with experiments today. The cloth at its mouth breathes enough. You return to the cup and drink again, a fourth and final generous swallow. The mind, now that the body has been satisfied, begins to think about other uses. A rinse for the basin, a splash along the tiles, to lay the dust before sweeping, a little set aside to cool the door lintel when the sun finds it. It is a relief to have the kind of water you can spend without an argument between duties. You set the cup rim down to dry on its usual square of tile, where a pale circle has been drawn by years of use. The jar you lift by its neck and turn so the mouth faces away from the day's warmth, a small habit that probably means nothing and therefore pleases you. Your hand rests a moment on the clay, and the clay returns the calm of its interior as if handing you back a well-folded cloth. At the basin, you press your small, damp palms to your face and let two cool roads slide toward your jaw. The sensation is simple and absolute. You could name the minerals, the lime, the clay, the faint leaf, but there is no reason to argue with sensation. Water is for drinking, washing, quieting, remembering. The names follow after. You gather the rope from where you set it and hang it on its peg in the dimmer corner where it will dry without sulking. A grain or two of sand falls from the coil to the floor and makes a sound only your ear cares to recognize. The peg's shadow is short now. It will lengthen again by afternoon. You glance toward the room where the jar will rest later, cool and patient, and then back to the courtyard where sun has begun to draw its geometry on tile. The morning has made its first full circle. From water to effort to water again. You promised yourself the first taste at the threshold, and the promise has been kept. The next task will be to give the jar its place in the day's shade, and to let the house begin its own slow conversation with the cool it holds. For now, you sit on the low bench, cup within reach, jar at your side, and watch the light arrive one careful square at a time. The cool room receives the jar the way a quiet harbor receives a small boat. You lift from the bench in two parts, first the thought, then the body, and take the jar by its neck, forearm guiding the tilt so the stopper keeps its polite seal. The doorway into the storage room is a breath lower than the others. You duck without looking. Inside, the air changes at once. Sunlight does not enter except as a suggestion, filtered through a slit high in the wall where light paints the idea of a rectangle and stops. The floor is packed earth, firm and faintly damp, and the walls hold the memory of night with a patience that tile cannot match. You walk to the shadowed corner that belongs to water. The reed mat there is old but tidy, its edges trimmed where fray would invite dust. A simple wooden stand, 4 legs joined by 2 crosspieces, keeps jars from resting their full weight on the earth. You lower your jar onto the mat beside the stand first, then lift again and settle it into the stand square, letting the feet find their sure grooves. Wood answers clay with a small, satisfied creak. The jar's shoulder leans a finger's breadth against the cool wall. Not enough to press, just enough to share temperature like 2 friends touching elbows in a way that says the conversation is comfortable. The room's breath is faintly sweet, with stored things barley in a lidded basket, almonds sewn up in a cloth sack, a coil of dried figs looped like a brown rope and hung from a peg, a crock sealed with wax and string. A pinch of last winter's cumin survives somewhere on a shelf and insists on being remembered. Beneath all of it is the persistent, almost floral scent of clay, kept away from sun, the smell of pots that have done their duty for years and plan to do it for years more. A plain, steady fact comes to stand beside the jar. Thick earthen walls, a small high vent, and floor close to the ground make rooms like this the simplest kind of cool keepers. In your century, houses measured their comfort less by clever devices and more by the reach of shade and the thickness of materials. Builders arranged storage where sun was least ambitious, and householders obeyed a set of unspoken instructions. Jars breathe, baskets sleep above mice, oil keeps to the darkest shelf, grain avoids the damp floor by living on boards that remember to leave air between earth and food. The logic is older than any one person, and younger than the first hot afternoon. You wet the corner of a cloth and wipe a ring on the jar's shoulder where your palm left a faint, warm print. The damp vanishes almost as soon as it appears, cooling the skin of the clay another half degree. You tilt your ear to the mouth and hear nothing, which is exactly what you want. Stillness is the sound of water correctly stored. Near the jar, a small line of crushed eggshells shines pale along the baseboard. A house habit learned from a neighbor who swears the brittle edge discourages ants from exploring and teaches the eye to notice where the sweep should pass. Whether ants respect such boundaries is a matter of their mood. You respect it for the way the line catches light, a quiet reminder that someone has been careful here. A fringe variant of the same habit uses a shallow saucer of water into which the stand's legs dip, making a tiny moat the insects cannot cross. Some households keep both methods like paired charms. Others laugh at both and keep a sharper broom. Historians still argue which remedies were common practice in your century, and which are the embroidery of later tellers who prefer kitchens that behave according to tidy rules. On the shelf above, a small clay cup waits inverted, its rim smoothed by lips and cloth. You set it upright, not for drinking now, but so that anyone entering will know the jar is fresh and should be approached with clean hands. Such signals are not written, but they function as writing all the same. Cup upright means new, cup down means nearly finished. Stopper knotted tight means guests are expected. Stopper loose means the household is simply breathing. Light slides a finger along the wall from the high slit and touches the jar's shoulder. You watch it fade. Somewhere beyond the room, the courtyard rooster delivers a late opinion. It enters here thinned and harmless. You listen to the cool instead. It is not silence. Not exactly more the quiet presence of temperature doing work, of air slow moving, of clay trading invisible gifts with the room. A small mainstream observation eases into thought. Many houses keep two jars, one for today's reach and one for tomorrow's patience, alternating so that the clay can rest and regather its cool. The resting jar gives back its chill more generously when asked again. You have known houses with 3 or 4, the extras used for long boiling days or for feasts when every basin wakes at once. This arrangement needs no blessing. It only needs space, and space is the true wealth of a modest room. You press the stopper and find it still properly loose, snug against dust, open to breath. A finger's twist would tighten it if flies were busy. A twist the other way would invite a ladle without argument. You leave it as it is. A thin, damp bloom begins around the stand's feet, where the floor drinks what the jar exhales. The circle will widen, then pale, then return, drawing and erasing itself with tireless discretion. Travelers call such marks stains. Households call them proof. There is an uncertainty that occasionally bothers the tidy-minded. Did families in your grandparents' day hang damp cloths near vents to encourage a greater cool, or did they trust stone alone? You have seen both, which solves nothing. Historians still argue whether evaporative tricks in small rooms like this were widespread in your century, or whether they took hold later, when people grew fond of turning every corner into a small experiment. The argument never enters this room. The room continues to do what it has always done. Resist noon with very little theater. On a peg near the door hangs a small broom of palm fiber. You draw it down and give the floor a polite sweep, gathering a day's worth of fine dust into a pan the size of your palm. The act is less about cleanliness than about resetting lines. The eggshell ridge is renewed, the mat's edges are reminded where to lie, the stand's feet are told that they are seen. You return the broom to its peg, and it sighs a single straw sound that only the room hears. You look once more at the jar to memorize its place. Shoulder just touching shadow, mouth faced away from the slit, cloth lying in a quiet sea, cup upright like a small, modest flag. Your hand rests on the clay. It is cooler than your skin and, for that reason, feels like company. At the threshold, you pause, as if the room deserves acknowledgement. You give it a brief nod, the same unremarkable nod the keeper received at the well, and step back into the brighter air. The house brightens around you in squares and strips where sun finds its angles. The cool room behind you contains its assignment without complaint. You carry forward the knowledge that water now waits where noon cannot boss it. In the courtyard, the tiles have warmed, but your feet remember the cool basin and the promise of shade that slides from wall to wall. As the sun debates its position, you will return to the jar many times today. A cup for tea, a ladle for washing leaves, a splash to quiet the dust before guests cross the threshold. Each return will be quick and ordinary. The morning's long task has folded itself into small, pleasing tasks. You close the storage door to a comfortable angle, not fully shut, not inviting, and let the latch rest without catching. The jar's silence follows you as far as the basin and then stops. As if a line, invisible and generous, has been agreed upon between rooms. Shadows begin their long work across the tiles, and the courtyard changes voice. The bright chatter of noon has fallen away to a slower register, as if the house itself is finishing a sentence it started at dawn. You bring the jar from the cool room and set it beside the basin. Not because it must be here to keep its temper, the room would do, but because evening is a time for water to be present. The clay carries the day's soft history in its skin, a faint bloom where it breathed, a cooler shoulder where it leaned into shade, a pale ring on the reed mat that will vanish by morning. You sit on the low bench with your back to the wall, still warm from the sun. The heat there is a generous one, not the noon's sharp insistence, but a stored comfort surrendering itself gradually to air and skin. The first stars are not yet visible, though the sky above the roofs is already deepening into a more deliberate blue. The pigeon that favored the parapet in the morning returns to claim it, steps twice, and folds itself into the shape of an old habit. You pour a small cup. The water is calmer now than when it first arrived, as if the day taught it to settle, though you know it is simply the clay doing the same reliable arithmetic it has done for years. The cup's cool meets the mouth, and the throat answers with uncomplicated gratitude. You do not rush the swallow. The evening does not reward speed. In the far corner, the mint has recovered from the heat, standing taller now that shadows have returned. You dip your fingers and flick 3 drops to its roots, not enough to boast, only enough to say that you noticed. A thin scent rises, green and clean, and briefly the courtyard becomes young again, like the hour before the rooster. A plain, steady fact keeps you company in this light. In the 17th century, many households used evening to reset their room's temperatures without naming the act as anything but closing the day. Doors were propped to invite cross breezes. Jars were drawn nearer to walls that gave back their slow cool. Courtyards received the ladle against tiles to quiet dust before mats were spread. Travelers remarked on this, often calling it hospitality, when it was simply the discipline of comfort learned from sun and stone. A fringe habit sometimes practiced here is the silent cup, a first sip taken at evening without speech, meant to carry the day's heat out of the body without bringing it back in words. You try it now, not as a rule but as a courtesy to your own bones. Whether such customs belong to your grandparents' time or were shaped later by tellers who prefer rituals to explanations, historians still argue. The cup does not argue, it behaves. From the alley comes a soft exchange, a greeting, the small shuffle of sandals, a laugh that ends before it begins. A donkey's bell sounds once, then is remorseful enough to remain quiet. The well's square holds its own evening grammar rope left looped, wheel pinned, a damp brush swept across the apron to collect the day's small history of spills. You have seen the keeper at this hour, leaning his shoulder against the frame and looking toward the sky the way one glances at an elder to be sure the story has ended properly. On the tiles, a few damp spoonfuls darken into islands, then lift as the air claims them. You pour a thin ribbon along the courtyard's edge and watch it thread itself into the line where wall meets floor, laying down the day's dust with a gentleness that feels like apology. The scent that rises is the same, always the same fresh, faintly mineral. The smell of earth answering water, and it steadies your breath as reliably as any prayer. You think of the morning's first cool as a distant kin to this one. There, the tiles were script underfoot, and your steps were reading. Here, the tiles are paper cooling under your palm, and the day has written what it wished to write. In the middle, you carried water through the alphabet of shadows and light, the grammar of rope and wheel, the punctuation of that backward thread that always returns to the well. A small uncertainty you keep returns, as evening invites such things. Whether the silent rules you observe the leaf laid across a stopper, the drop at a threshold, the touch on the rim are old enough to deserve the word tradition or simply good manners that have learned to look like age. Historians still argue about such matters because arguments travel just as faithfully as caravans. You sip and allow not knowing to sit at your side like a welcome neighbor who never overstays. You rinse the cup and set it upside down at the edge of the basin, then smooth the reed mat with your palm so the jar's base will sleep on evenly arranged lines. The pigeon, as if obeying a private bell, drops to the edge of the basin and takes a quick, respectful drink from a shallow puddle you did not know was there. It raises its head to swallow, then returns to the parapet, satisfied with the portion the courtyard granted it. The sky completes its color and offers the first star without asking for attention. You give it attention anyway. The jar's shoulder cools further. Your back yields the last stored warmth from the wall. Somewhere behind the rooms, a pot lid clicks softly as heat underneath it decides to become memory. You rest the side of your face against the inside of your wrist, where the skin still remembers rope and clay, and listen to the house forget the day's sharper edges. The evening does not hurry, neither do you. The water beside you keeps its modest promise to be exactly itself when asked, and no more. You promise to ask gently. You draw one more thread of cool from the cup, press the stopper lightly to be sure dust will not dream of entering, and let the courtyard finish the paragraph in shadows while you begin your own small, practiced silence. The courtyard grows softer until it is only shape and temperature. The jar breathes its slow cool, and the floor gives back the day in a warmth so thin you cannot tell when it leaves. You let your hands rest, one over the other, as if holding a folded cloth. The sounds are simple now. A pigeon shifting a single foot, a cup settling on tile, a leaf brushing a wall, and then deciding to be still. You sit, and your breath learns the room's pace. In, the faint mineral of water. Out, the quieter air of evening. The house accepts both without comment. Somewhere, a lid clicks again, but softer, as if the story it was telling no longer needs a voice. The first star becomes 2, then 3, and the sky is a dark bowl turned kindly over the roofs. You think of the path in a few brief pictures that do not ask to be held. Cool tiles underfoot, mint brushing your fingers, rope marking your shoulder like a line drawn and erased in the same motion. The well waits out there in the square, already pinned and quiet, its wheel remembering the day in a single, restful groove. Tomorrow will ask the same steps, and the body will answer with the same steady grammar. This thought is not heavy. It is easy as a folded blanket. You rise only enough to place the jar so its shoulder leans a little more into shade. Your palm warms against its cool for one breath, then 2. The breath leaves your chest like a soft wave, sliding back over sand. Your eyes follow the darker seam where wall meets floor, and the seam follows itself into the corner where the room keeps its reserve of quiet. You let the quiet include you. The night opens, and nothing is asked of you but rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.